Chapter 6, Charles V at Fontainebleau. It was not without grave doubts and a terrible sinking at the heart that Charles V stepped foot upon French territory, where oath and heir were, so to speak, his enemies, whose king he had treated unworthily when he was a prisoner in his hands, and whose dauphin he had perhaps poisoned. He was at least accused of it. Europe anticipated terrible reprisals on the part of Francois I from the moment that his rival placed himself in his power. But Charles's audacity, great gambler in empires that he was, would not permit him to draw back, and as soon as he had skillfully felt the ground and paved the way, he boldly crossed the Pyrenees. He counted upon finding devoted friends of the French court, and thought that he could safely trust the three guarantees: the ambition of Madame d'Etampes, the overweening conceit of the Connétable and de Montmorency, and the king's chivalrous nature. We have seen how and for what reason the Duchess chose to serve his interests. With the Constable it was a different matter. The great stumbling block in the way of statesmen of all lands and all periods is the question of alliances. Politics, which, in this matter and many others, is perforce conjectural only, is often mistaken, alas, like the science of medicine, in studying the symptoms of affinities between peoples, and in risking remedies for their animosities. Now the Constable was a monomaniac on the subject of the Spanish alliance. He had got it into his head that France's salvation lay in that direction, and provided that he could satisfy Charles V, who had been at war with his master 20 years out of 25, he cared but little how much he displeased his other allies, the Turks and the Protestants, or let slip the most magnificent opportunities, like that which gave Flanders to Francois I. The king had blind confidence in Montmorency. In truth, the Constable had in the last war against the emperor displayed a hitherto unheard of resolution, and had checked the enemy's advance. To be sure, he did it at the cost of the ruin of a province, by laying the country waste before him, by devastating a tenth part of France. But what especially impressed the king was his minister's haughty roughness of manner, his inflexible obstinacy, which to a superficial mind might seem cleverness, and unswerving firmness of resolution. The result was that Francois listened to the great suborner of men, as Brantome calls him, with a deference equal to the fear inspired in his inferiors by this terrible reciter of paternosters, who alternated his prayers with hangings. Charles V could therefore safely rely upon the persevering friendship of the Constable. He placed even more reliance upon his rival's generosity. Indeed, Francois I carried magnanimity to an absurd point. "My kingdom," he said, "has no toll house, like a bridge, and I do not sell my hospitality." The astute Charles knew that he could trust the word of the knightly king. Nevertheless, when the emperor was fell upon French territory, he could not overcome his apprehension and his doubts. He found the king's two sons awaiting him at the frontier, and throughout his journey they overwhelmed him with attentions and honors. But the crafty monarch shuddered as he thought that all this appearance of cordiality might conceal some deep-laid snare. "I must say that I sleep very ill," he said, "in a foreign country." He brought an anxious, preoccupied face to the fates which were given him, and, as he advanced farther and farther toward the heart of the country, he became more and more sad and gloomy. Whenever he rode into a city, he would ask himself, amid all the haranguing, as he passed beneath the triumphal arches, if that was the city where he was to be imprisoned. Then he would murmur beneath his breath, "Not this or any other city, but all France is my dungeon. All these assiduous courtiers are my jailers." And each hour as it passed added something to the apprehension of this tiger, who believed himself to be in a cage, and saw bars on all sides. One day, as they were riding along, Charles d'Orleans, a fascinating, frolicsome child, who was in great haste to be amiable and gallant, as a son of France, before dying of the plague like any peasant, leaped lightly to the saddle behind the emperor and threw his arms about his waist, crying gleefully, "Now you are my prisoner." Charles became pale as death and nearly fainted. At Châtellerault, the poor imaginary captive was met by Francois, who welcomed him fraternally, and on the following day presented the whole court to him, the valorous, magnificent nobility, the glory of the country, and the artists and men of letters, the glory of the king. The fetes and merrymakings began in good earnest. The emperor wore a brave face everywhere, but in his heart he was afraid, and constantly reproached himself for his imprudence. From time to time, as if to test his liberty, he would go out at daybreak from the chateau where he had lain at night, and he was delighted to see that his movements were not interfered with outside of the honors paid him. But could he be sure that he was not watched from a distance? Sometimes, as if from mere caprice, he changed the itinerary arranged for his journey, to the despair of Francois I, because part of the ceremonial prescribed by him went for naught as a consequence. When he was within 2 days' ride of Paris, he remembered with terror the French king's sojourn at Madrid. For an emperor, the capital would seem to be the most honorable place of detention, and at the same time the surest. He therefore begged the king to escort him at once to Fontainebleau, of which he had heard so much. This overturned all of Francois's plans, but he was too hospitable to allow his disappointment to appear, and at once sent word to the queen and all the ladies to repair to Fontainebleau. The presence of his sister Eleonora, and a confidence in her husband's good faith, allayed the emperor's anxiety to some extent. But, although reassured for the moment, Charles V was never able to feel at his ease while he was within the dominions of the King of France. Francois was a mirror of the past, Charles a type of the future. The sovereign of modern times never rightly understood the hero of the Middle Ages. It was impossible that there should be any real sympathy between the last of the chevaliers and the first of the diplomatists. It is true Louis XI might, strictly speaking, lay claim to this latter title, but in our opinion Louis XI was not so much the scheming diplomatist as the grasping miser. On the day of the emperor's arrival there was a hunting party in the forest of Fontainebleau. Hunting was a favorite pastime of Francois I. It was not much better than a terrible bore to Charles V. Nevertheless, he seized with avidity this further opportunity to see if he was not a prisoner. He let the hunt pass, took a byroad, and rode about at random until he was lost. But when he found that he was entirely alone in the middle of the forest, as free as the air that blew through the branches, or as the birds that flew through the air, he was almost wholly reassured, and began to recover his good humor in some measure. And yet the anxious expression returned to his face when, upon his making his appearance at the rendezvous, Francois came to him, flushed with the excitement of the chase, and still holding in his hand the bleeding boar spear. The warrior of Marigno and Pavia was much in evidence in the king's pleasures. "Come, my dear brother, let us enjoy ourselves," said Francois, passing his arm through Charles's in a friendly way, when they had both alighted at the palace gate, and, leading him to the gallery to Diane, resplendent with the paintings of Rosso and Primaticcio. "Vry you are as thoughtful as I was at Madrid, but you will agree, my dear brother, that I had some reason for being so, for I was your prisoner, while you are my guest. You are free. You are on the eve of a triumph. Rejoice therefore with us, if not because of the fates, which are doubtless beneath the notice of a great politician like yourself, at least in the thought that you are on your way to humble all those beer-drinking Flemings, who presume to talk of renewing the communes. Or, better still, forget the rebels, and think only of enjoying yourself with friends. Does not my court impress you pleasantly?" "It is superb, my brother," said Charles, "and I envy you. I too have a court. You have seen it. But a stern, joyless court, a gloomy assemblage of statesmen and generals like Lannoy, Peschiara, and Antonio de Lara. But you have, beside your warriors and statesmen, beside your Montmorencys and Jubilees, beside your scholars, beside Bude, Duchatel, and Lascaris, beside all these you have your poets and your artists, Marot, Jean Goujon, Primaticcio, Benvenuto, and, above all, your adorable women, Marguerite de Navarre, Diane de Poitiers, Catherine de Medicis, and so many others. And verily I begin to believe, my dear brother, that I would willingly exchange my gold mines for your flower-strewn fields." "Ah, but you have not yet seen the fairest of all these lovely flowers," said Francois naively to Eleonora's brother. "No, and I am dying with longing to see that marvelous pearl of loveliness," said the emperor, who understood that the king alluded to Madame d'Etampes. "But even now I think that it is well said that yours is the fairest realm on earth, my brother. But you have the fairest countship, Flanders, the fairest duchy, Milan." "You refused the first last month," said the emperor, smiling, "and I thank you for so doing. But you covet the other, do you not?" he added with a sigh. "Ah, let us not talk of serious matters today, my cousin, I beg you," said Francois. "After the pleasures of war there is nothing, I confess, which I like less to disturb than the pleasures of a festal occasion like the present. It is a truth, rejoined Charles, with a grimace of a miser, who realizes that he must pay a debt. It is a truth that the Milanese is very dear to my heart, and that it will be like tearing my heart out to give it to you. Say rather to return it to me, my brother. That word would be more accurate, and would perhaps soften your disappointment. But that is not the matter in hand now. We must enjoy ourselves. We will talk of the Milanese later. Gift or restitution, given or returned, said the emperor, you will none the less possess one of the finest lordships in the world. For you shall have it, my brother. It is decided, and I will keep my engagements with you as faithfully as you keep yours with me. Mon Dieu, cried Francois, beginning to be vexed at this everlasting recurrence to serious matters. What do you regret, my brother? Are you not king of the Spains, emperor of Germany, count of Flanders, and lord, either by influence or by right of your sword, of all Italy, from the foot of the Alps to the farthest point of Calabria? But you have France, rejoined Charles with a sigh. You have the Indies and their golden treasures. You have Peru and the mines. But you have France. You reign over an empire so vast that the sun never sets upon it. But you have France. What would your majesty say if I should cast an eye on this diamond among kingdoms, as fondly and gloatingly as you gaze upon that pearl of duchies, Milan? Look, you, my brother, said Francois gravely, I have instincts rather than ideas upon these momentous questions. But, as they say in your country, do not touch the queen. So I say to you, do not touch France. Mon Dieu, exclaimed Charles, are we not cousins and allies? Most certainly, was Francois' reply, and I most earnestly hope that nothing will happen henceforth to embitter our relationship or disturb our alliance. I too hope so, said the emperor. But, he continued, with his cunning smile and hypocritical expression, can I answer for the future and prevent my son Philip, for instance, from falling out with your son Henri? Such a quarrel would not be dangerous for France if Augustus is succeeded by Tiberius. What matter who the master is, said Charles, waxing warm. The empire will still be the empire, and the Rome of the Caesars was still Rome when the Caesars had ceased to be Caesars in everything save name. True, but the empire of Charles V is not the empire of Octavius, my brother, said Francois, a little piqued. Pavia was a glorious battle, but it was no Actium. Then, too, Octavius was very wealthy, while, notwithstanding your Indian treasures and your Peruvian mines, you are well known to be in straitened circumstances financially. Your unpaid troops were driven to sack Rome to procure means of subsistence, and now that Rome is sacked they are in revolt. And you, my brother, said Charles, have alienated the royal domains, as I am informed, and are driven to treat Luther very tenderly, so that the German princes may consent to loan you money. Not to mention the fact, retorted Francois, that your Cortes is very far from being so manageable as a Senate, while I can boast that I have freed the kings of France from their dependence forever. Beware that your parliaments don't put you back into leading strings some fine day. The discussion was growing warm. Both monarchs were getting excited, and the long-standing antipathy which had kept them apart so long was beginning to glow afresh. Francois was on the point of forgetting the duties of hospitality, and Charles the dictates of prudence, when the former suddenly remembered that he was beneath his own roof. On my word, my good brother, he exclaimed abruptly, laughing aloud, I believe, by Mahomet's belly, that we were near losing our tempers. I told you that we must not talk of serious matters, but must leave such discussions to our ministers, and keep for ourselves only our good friendship. Come, let us agree, once for all, that you are to have the world, less France, and drop the subject. Unless the Milanese, my brother, said Charles, realizing the imprudence he had been guilty of, and seeking at once to avoid its effects, for the Milanese is yours. I have promised it to you, and I renew my promise. As they exchanged these mutual assurances of continuing goodwill, the door of the gallery opened, and Madame d'Etampes appeared. The king walked quickly to meet her, took her hand, and led her to where the emperor stood, who, seeing her then for the first time, and, Being fully informed as to what had taken place between her and Monsieur de Medina, fixed his most penetrating gaze upon her as she approached. "My brother," said the king, smiling, "do you see this fair dame?" "Not only do I see her," replied Charles, "but I admire her." "Very well. You do not know what she wants. Is it one of my Spains? I will give it her." "No, no, brother, not that." "What then?" "She wants me to detain you at Paris until you have destroyed the Treaty of Madrid and confirmed by acts a promise you have given me. If the advice is good, you should follow it," rejoined the emperor, bowing low before the duchess, as much to hide the sudden pallor which these words caused to overspread his face, as to perform an act of courtesy. He had no time to say more, nor could Francois see the effect produced by the words he had laughingly let fall, and which Charles was quite ready to take seriously. For the door opened again, and the whole court poured into the gallery. During the half-hour preceding dinner, when this clever, cultivated, corrupt throng was assembled in the salons of the palace, the scene we described apropos of the reception at the Louvre was reenacted in all its essential details. There were the same men and the same women, the same courtiers and the same valets. Loving and malevolent glances were exchanged as usual, and sarcastic remarks and gallant speeches were indulged in with the customary freedom. Charles V, spying into Montmorency, whom he with good reason deemed to be his surest ally, went to him, and talked in a corner with him and the Duke of Medina, his ambassador. "I will sign whatever you choose, Constable," said the emperor, who knew the old campaigner's loyalty. "Prepare deed of cession of the Duchy of Milan, and by St. James, though it be one of the brightest jewels of my crown, I will sign an absolute surrender of it to you." "A deed!" cried the constable, hotly putting aside the suggestion of a precaution which implied distrust. "A deed, sire? What is your majesty's meaning?" "No deed, sire, no deed. Your word, nothing more. Does your majesty think that we shall have less confidence in you than you had in us, when you came to France with no written document to rely upon?" "You will do as you should do, Monsieur de Montmorency," rejoined the emperor, giving him his hand. "You will do what you should do." The constable walked away. "Poor dupe!" exclaimed the emperor. "He plays at politics, Medina, as moles dig their holes, blindly." "But the king, sire?" queried Medina. "The king is too proud of his own grandeur of soul not to be sure of ours. He will foolishly let us go, Medina, and we will prudently let him wait. To make him wait, my lord, is not to break my promise, but to postpone its fulfillment. That is all." "But Madame d'Etampes," suggested Medina. "As to her we shall see," said the emperor, moving up and down a magnificent ring with a superb diamond, which he wore on his left thumb. "Ah, I must have a long interview with her." While these words were rapidly exchanged in low tones between the emperor and his minister, the duchess was mercilessly making sport of Marmain, apropos of his nocturnal exploits, all in presence of Messire d'Estourville. "Can it be of your people, Monsieur de Marmain," she was saying, "that Benvenuto tells every come of this extraordinary story? Attacked by four bandits, and with but one arm free to defend himself, he simply made these gentry escort him home. Were you one of these gentlemanly bravos, Viscount?" "Madam," replied poor Marmain, in confusion, "it did not take place precisely in that way, and Benvenuto tells the story too favorably for himself." Yes, yes, I doubt not that he embroiders a little, and adds a few details by way of ornament. But the main fact is true, Viscount, the main fact is true, and in such matters the main fact is everything." "Madam," returned Marmain, "I promise you that I will have my revenge, and I shall be more fortunate next time." "Pardon, Viscount, pardon. It's not a question of revenge, but of beginning another game. Cellini, I should say, has won the first two bouts." "Yes, thanks to my absence," muttered Marmain, with increasing embarrassment, "because my men took advantage of my not being there to run away, the miserable villains." "Oh," said the provost, "I advise you, Marmain, to admit that you are beaten in that direction. You have no luck with Cellini." "In that case it seems to me that we may console each other, my dear provost," retorted Marmain, For if we add known facts to the mysterious rumors which are in circulation, the capture of the Grand Nestle to the reported disappearance of one of its fair inmates, Cellini would seem not to have brought you luck either, Messiah d'Esterville. To be sure, he is said to be actively interested in the fortunes of your family, if not in your own, my dear Provost. Monsieur de Marmain, cried the Provost fiercely, in a furious rage to learn that his paternal infelicity was beginning to be noised abroad. Monsieur de Marmain, you will explain to me later what you mean by your words. Ah, Messrs, exclaimed the Duchess, do not forget, I beg you, that I am here. You are both in the wrong. Monsieur le Prévôt, it is not for those who know so little about seeking to ridicule those who know so little about finding. Monsieur de Marmain, in the hour of defeat we must unite against a common enemy, and not afford him the additional satisfaction of seeing the vanquished slashing at one another's throats. They are going to the Salle Manger. Your hand, Monsieur de Marmain. Ah, well, since it seems that men, for all their strength, avail nothing against Cellini, we will see if a woman's wiles will find him equally invincible. I have always thought that allies were simply in the way, and have always loved to make war alone. The risk is greater, I know, but at least the honors of victory are not to be shared with anyone. The impertinent varlet, exclaimed Marmain. See how familiarly he is talking to our great king. Would not one say he was nobly born, whereas he is naught but a mere stone-cutter? What's that you say, Viscount? Why, he is a nobleman and of the most venerable nobility, said the Duchess with a laugh. Do you know of many among our oldest families who descend from a lieutenant of Julius Caesar, and who have the 3 fleur-de-lis and the lambel of the house of Anjou in their crest? 'Tis not the king who honors the sculptor by speaking to him, Messrs, as you see. The sculptor, on the other hand, confers honor upon the king by condescending to address him. Francois, I, and Cellini were in fact conversing at that moment with a familiarity to which the great ones of earth had accustomed the chosen artist of heaven. Well, Benvenuto, the king was saying, how do we come on with our Jupiter? I am preparing to cast it, sire. And when will that great work be performed? Immediately upon my return to Paris, sire. Take our best foundry men, Cellini, and omit nothing to make the operation successful. If you need money, you know that I am ready. I know that you are the greatest, the noblest, and the most generous king on earth, sire, replied Benvenuto, but thanks to the salary which your majesty orders paid to me, I am rich. As to the operation concerning which you are somewhat anxious, sire, I will, with your gracious permission, rely upon my own resources to prepare and execute it. I distrust all your French foundrymen, not that they are unskillful, but because I am afraid that their national pride will make them disinclined to place their skill at the service of an artist from beyond the Alps. And I confess, sire, that I attach too much importance to the success of my Jupiter to allow any other than myself to lay hand to it. Bravo, Cellini, bravo, cried the king, spoken like a true artist. Moreover, added Benvenuto, I wish to be entitled to remind your majesty of the promise you made me. That is right, my trusty friend. If we are content with it, we are to grant you a boon. We have not forgotten. Indeed, if we should forget, we bound ourselves in the presence of witnesses. Is it not so, Montmorency? And Poyet, our constable and our chancellor will remind us of our plighted word. Ah, your majesty cannot conceive how precious that word has become to me since the day it was given. Very well, it shall be kept, monsieur. But the doors are open. To table, Messrs, to table. Francois thereupon joined the emperor, and the two together walked at the head of the procession formed by the illustrious guests. Both wings of the folding doors being thrown open, the two sovereigns entered side by side and took places facing each other, Charles between Eleonora and Madame d'Etampes, Francois between Catherine de Medicis and Marguerite de Navarre. The banquet was exquisite, and the guests in the best of spirits. Francois was in his element, and enjoyed himself in kingly fashion, but laughed like a serf at all the tales told him by Marguerite de Navarre. Charles overwhelmed Madame d'Etampes with compliments and attentions. The others talked of art and politics, and so the time passed. At dessert, As was customary, the pages brought water for the guests to wash their hands. Thereupon Madame d'Etampes took the ewer and basin intended for Charles V from the hands of the servitor, while Marguerite did the same for Francois, poured water from a ewer into the basin, and, kneeling upon one knee, according to the Spanish etiquette, presented the basin to the emperor. He dipped the ends of his fingers, gazing at his noble and beautiful attendant the while, and laughingly dropped the superb ring, of which we have spoken, into the water. "Your Majesty is losing your ring," said Anne, dipping her own taper fingers into the water and daintily picking up the jewel, which he handed to the emperor. "Keep the ring, madam," the emperor replied in a low voice. "The hands in which it now is are too noble and too beautiful for me to take it from them again. It is to bind the bargain for the Duchy of Milan," he added in a still lower tone. The Duchess smiled and said no more. The pebble had fallen at her feet, but the pebble was worth a million. As they returned from the salle-à-manger to the salon, and passed thence to the ballroom, Madame d'Etampes stopped Benvenuto, who was brought near to her by the press. "Messire Cellini," said she, handing him the ring which constituted a pledge of the alliance between the emperor and herself, "here is a diamond which you will hand, if you please, to your pupil Ascanio for the crown of my lily. It is a dewdrop, I promise him. And it has fallen from Aurora's fingers in very truth, madam," rejoined the artist with mocking smile and affected gallantry. He glanced at the ring and started back in surprise, for he recognized the diamond he had long ago set for Pope Clement VII, and had himself carried to the sublime emperor on the sovereign pontiff's behalf. To induce Charles V to divest himself of such a priceless jewel, especially in favor of a woman, there must necessarily be some secret understanding, some occult treaty between himself and the recipient. While Charles continues to pass his days and nights at Fontainebleau, in the alternations of distrust and confidence, we have endeavored to describe, while he schemes, intrigues, burrows underground, promises, retracts, and promises anew, let us cast a glance upon the Grand Nestle, and see if anything of interest is occurring among those of its occupants who have remained there. Chapter 7. The Ghostly Monk. The whole colony was in a state of intense excitement. The ghost of the monk, the unsubstantial guest of the convent, upon the ruins of which Amari's palace was built, had returned within 3 or 4 days. Dame Perini had seen him walking around at night in the gardens of the Grand Nestle, clad in his long white frock, and treading so lightly that he left no footprints on the ground and made no noise. How happened that Dame Perini, whose domicile was a Petit Nestle, had seen the ghostly visitor walking in the garden of the Grand Nestle at 3 o'clock in the morning? We cannot tell except by committing a very grave indiscretion. But we are historians first of all, and our readers are entitled to know the most secret details of the lives of the characters we have brought upon the stage, especially when those details are calculated to throw a bright light upon the sequel of our narrative. Dame Perini, by virtue of Colombe's disappearance, by the retirement of Poultry, for whose presence there was no further pretext, and by the departure of the provost, was left absolute mistress of the Petit Nestle. For the gardener Rainbow and his assistants were, for economical reasons, engaged in Messire d'Esterville's service during the day only. Dame Perini found herself, therefore, queen of the Petit Nestle, but at the same time a solitary queen, so that she nearly died of ennui during the day and of fear at night. It occurred to her that there was a remedy for this unfortunate condition of affairs. During the day at least, her friendly relations with Dame Ruperta opened the doors of the Grand Nestle to her. She asked permission to visit her neighbors, and it was most cordially granted. But upon availing herself of this permission, Dame Perini was naturally brought in contact with her neighbors of the other sex. Dame Perini was a buxom creature of 36 years, who confessed to 29 of them, plump and rosy still, and always prepossessing. Her coming was quite an event in the studio, where 10 or 12 worthy fellows were forging, cutting, filing, hammering, chiseling, good livers all, fond of play on Sundays, of wine on Sundays and holidays, and of the fair sex all the time. 3 of our old acquaintances, after 3 or 4 days had passed, were all brought down with the same arrow. They were little Jehan, Simon Lagosha, and Herman the German. Ascanio, Jacques Aubry, and Pagolo escaped the charm, having their minds on other things. The other comrades may well have felt some sparks of this Greek fire, but they realized their inferior position no doubt, and poured the water of their humility upon the first sparks before they became a conflagration. Little Johann loved after the manner of Cherubino, that is to say, he was in love with loving. Dame Perini, as the reader will readily understand, had too much common sense to respond to such an ignis fatuus as that. Simon Lagosha could offer more reliable future prospects, and his flame promised to be more enduring. But Dame Perini was a very superstitious person. She had seen Simon cross himself with his left hand, and she reflected that it would be necessary for him to sign the marriage contract with his left hand. Dame Perini was convinced that the sign of the cross executed with the left hand was calculated to destroy rather than to save a soul, and in like manner no one could have persuaded her that a marriage contract signed with the left hand could have any other result than an unhappy marriage. She therefore, but without disclosing the reasons for her repugnance, received Simon Lagosha's first advances in a way to make him renounce all hope. Hermann remained. Hermann. That was a different matter. Hermann was no coxcomb, like little Johann, nor a man with the seal of nature's displeasure upon him, like left-handed Simon. In Hermann's personality, there was something honest and outspoken which appealed to Dame Perini's heart. Moreover, Hermann, instead of having a left hand for the right and vice versa, made use of either or both so energetically that he seemed to have two right hands. He was a magnificent man, too, according to all vulgar ideas. Dame Perini therefore had fixed her choice upon Hermann. But, as we know, Hermann was as innocent as Celadon. The result was that Dame Perini's first broadsides, the pouting in sighs and sidelong glances, were utterly powerless against the naive timidity of the honest German. He contented himself with staring at Dame Perini out of his great round eyes. But, like the blind men of the gospel, eyes had he, but he saw not, or if he did see, he saw the buxom governess as a whole simply, without noting details. Dame Perini repeatedly proposed that they should go for a walk on the Quai des Augustins, or in the gardens of the Grand, or Petit Nestle, and on every occasion she selected Hermann for her cavalier. This made Hermann very happy internally. His great Teutonic heart beat 5 or 6 extra pulsations a minute when Dame Perini was hanging upon his arm, but either because he found some difficulty in pronouncing the French language, or because it gave him greater pleasure to hear the object of his secret thoughts talk, Dame Perini could rarely extract anything more from him than these 2 sacramental phrases, Poncho, mademoiselle, and adieu, mademoiselle, which Hermann generally pronounced at an interval of 2 hours, the first when Dame Perini took his arm, the second when she let it go. Now, although this title of Mademoiselle was immensely flattering to Dame Perini, and although there was something very agreeable in talking 2 hours without fear of interruption, she would have been glad to have her monologue broken in upon by an occasional interjection, which might give us some idea of the progress she was making in the heart of her mute attendant. Her progress, however, was none the less real for not being expressed in words or by play of feature. The fire was kindled in the honest German's heart, and, being fanned every day by Dame Perini's presence, became a veritable volcano. Hermann began at last to be conscious of the preference Dame Perini accorded him, and he was only waiting until he was a little more certain of it to declare himself. Dame Perini understood his hesitation. One evening, as he parted from her at the door of the Petit Nestle, she saw that he was so agitated that she thought it would be a real kindness on her part to press his hand. Hermann, transported with delight, responded by a similar demonstration, but to his great amazement Dame Perini gave a piercing shriek. In his delirious bliss, Hermann did not measure his pressure. He thought that the tighter he squeezed her hand, the more accurate idea he would convey of the violence of his passion, and he very nearly crushed the poor governess's fingers. Hermann was thunderstruck by his shriek, but Dame Perini, fearing to discourage him just as he had summoned up courage to make his first advance, forced herself to smile and said, as she separated her fingers, which were almost glued together for the moment, "It's nothing, dear Monsieur Hermann. It's nothing, absolutely nothing." "Tausend pardons, Mademoiselle Perini," said the German, "but I loaf you, Serville, and I half press your hand as I loaf you. Tausend pardons. There's no need, Monsieur Hermann, there's no need. Your love is an honorable love, I trust, which a woman need not blush to win." "Oh, Chu," cried Hermann. "Indeed, my loaf is honorable, Mademoiselle Perini, but I have not yet dared to speak to you of it. but since thy word hath escaped me, I loaf you, I loaf you, I loaf you, servile Mademoiselle Perini. And I, Monsieur Herman, said Dame Perini mincingly, think I can say, for I believe you to be a gallant youth, incapable of compromising a poor woman, that, mon Dieu, how shall I say it? Oh, say it, cried Herman. Well, that, it is wrong of me to confess it. Neen, it is not wrong. Say it. Very well. I confess that I am not indifferent to your passion. Sacrament, cried the German, beside himself with joy. Now one evening when, after promenade, the Julia of the Petit Nestle had escorted her Romeo to the door of the Grand Nestle, she espied as she was returning alone through the garden door, the white spectre we have mentioned, which, in the opinion of the worthy governess, could be no other than that of the monk. It is needless to say that Dame Perini entered the house half dead with fear and barricaded herself in her room. The next morning the whole studio was acquainted with the story of the nocturnal apparition. Dame Perini, however, contented herself with relating the simple fact without going into details. The ghostly monk had appeared. That was the whole of it. It was useless to question her, for she would say nothing more. All that day the ghostly monk was the engrossing subject of conversation at the Grand Nestle. Some believed in the appearance of the phantom, others laughed at it. It was noticed that Ascanio was the leader of the skeptics, the others being Little Jehan, Simon Lagosha, and Jack Aubrey. The faction of the believers included Dame Rupeda, Scotzone, Pagolo, and Herman. In the evening they all assembled in the second courtyard of the Petit Nestle. Dame Perini, when questioned in the morning as to the origin of the legend of the ghostly monk, requested that she might have a day to refresh her memory, and when night came she announced that she was ready to relate the awful story. Dame Perini was as knowing in the matter of stage effects as a modern dramatist, and she knew that a ghost story loses all its effect if told in the sunlight, while, on the other hand, that effect is doubled if it is told in the dark. Her audience consisted of Herman, who sat at her right, Dame Rupeda, who sat at her left, Pagolo and Scotzone, who sat side by side, and Jack Aubrey, who lay on the grass between his two friends, Lil Jehan and Simon Lagosha. Ascanio had declared that he held such old women's tales in utter contempt, and would not even listen to them. Unzo, Mademoiselle Perini, said Herman after a moment of silence, while each one arranged his posture so as to listen at ease. Unzo, you are going to tell us the story of the monk's ghost. Yes, said Dame Perini, yes, but I ought to warn you that it's a terrible story, and perhaps not a very comfortable one to listen to at this hour. But as we are all devout persons, although there may be some skeptics among us on the subject of ghosts, and as Monsieur Herman is strong enough to put Satan himself to flight if he should make his appearance, I will venture to tell you the story. Pardon, Mademoiselle Perini, but if Satan comes, I must tell you not to count on me. I will fight him, mighty men. J.A., all you choose, put not a mighty der Teufel. Never mind. I will fight him if he comes. Dame Perini, said Jack Aubrey, go on, and don't be afraid. Is there a charcoal burner in your story, Mademoiselle Perini? Queried Herman. A charcoal burner? No, Monsieur Herman. All right, it's all the same. Why a charcoal burner? Because in all the Shareman stories there's a charcoal burner. Put never mind, it must be a fine story all the same. Go on, Mademoiselle Perini. You must know, then, began Dame Perini, that there was formerly on the spot where we now sit, and before the Hotel de Nestle was built, a community of monks composed of the handsomest men ever seen, the shortest of whom was as tall as Monsieur Herman. Pest! What a community that must have been, cried Jack Aubrey. Be quiet, babbler, said Scotzone. Yes, be quiet, papilla, echoed Herman. I'll be quiet, said the student. Go on, Dame Perini. The prior, whose name was Enguerrand, was a particularly fine specimen. They all had glossy black beards, with black and gleaming eyes, but the prior had the blackest beard and the brightest eyes of all. Moreover, the worthy brethren were devout and austere in their devotion to an unparalleled degree, and their voices were so melodious and sweet that people came from leagues around simply to hear them sing the Vesper service. At least so I have been told. "Oh, the poor monks," said Ruperta. "It's extremely interesting," said Jack Aubrey. "Es ist sehr wunderbar," said Herman. One day, pursued Dame Perini, flattered by the marks of appreciation evoked by a narrative, a handsome young man was brought before the prior, who requested to be admitted to the convent as a novice. He had no beard as yet, but he had large eyes as black as ebony, and long dark hair with a glossy shimmer like jet, so that he was admitted without hesitation. He said that his name was Antonio, and requested to be attached to the personal service of the prior, a request which was granted without hesitation. I spoke of voices just now, but Antonio's was the fresh and melodious voice par excellence. Everybody who heard him sing on the following Sunday was carried away by it, and yet there was a something in the voice which distressed even while it fascinated you, a quality which aroused worldly rather than celestial ideas in the hearts of those who listened to it. But all the monks were so pure of heart that none but strangers experienced this singular emotion, and Don Enguerrand, who was utterly unconscious of anything of the sort, was so enchanted with Antonio's voice that he appointed him thenceforth to sing the responses in the anthems alone, alternately with the organ. The conduct of the young novice was most exemplary, and he waited upon the prior with incredible zeal and earnestness. The only thing for which he could possibly be reproved was his constant fits of distraction from his devotions. Always and everywhere his glowing eyes were fastened upon the prior. "What are you looking at, Antonio?" Don Enguerrand would say to him. "I'm looking at you, my father," would be the reply. "Look at your prayer book, Antonio." "Now what are you looking at?" "You, my father." "Antonio, look at the image of the Virgin." "What are you looking at now?" "You, my father." "Antonio, look at the crucifix which we adore." Don Enguerrand began to notice, after a time, upon searching his conscience, that since Antonio's reception into the community he had been more troubled than formerly by evil thoughts. Never before had he sinned more than 7 times a day, which, as we all know, is the reckoning of the saints. Sometimes even he had examined his conduct for the day without being able to find more than 5 or 6 sins, an extraordinary thing. But now the total of his daily peccadillos mounted as high as 10, 12, or even 15. He would try to make up for it on the following day. He would pray and fast and scourge himself with the worthy man. But the farther he went, the greater became the reckoning, until at last it reached a full score. Poor Don Enguerrand knew not which way to turn. He felt that he was damned in spite of all he could do, and he noticed an observation which might have comforted another, but which increased his consternation, that his most austere monks were under the same strange, incredible, incomprehensible influence, so that their confession, which formerly lasted 20 minutes, half an hour, or an hour at most, now occupied several hours. About this time, an occurrence which had been creating a great stir in the province for a month past at last became known at the convent. The lord of a castle nearby had lost his daughter Antonia. Antonia had disappeared one fine evening exactly as my poor Colombe has disappeared. But there's this difference. I am sure that Colombe is an angel, while it seems that Antonia was possessed of the devil. The poor father had sought the fugitive high and low, just as Monsieur le Prévôt has sought Colombe. Only the convent remained to be visited, and as he knew that the evil spirit, the better to elude search, sometimes conceals himself in monasteries, he sent his chaplain to Don Enguerrand to ask permission to make search in his. The prior assented, with the best possible grace. Perhaps, he thought, he might by means of this visit discover something concerning the magic influence which had been weighing upon him and his brethren for a month past. But no, the search had no result whatever, and the nobleman was about to retire more despairing than ever, when all the monks passed in procession before him and Don Enguerrand, on their way to the chapel for the evening service. He looked at them mechanically, one after another, until the last one passed, when he cried out, "God in heaven, that is Antonia. That is my daughter." Antonia, for it was she, became as pale as a lily. "What are you doing in this sacred garb?" continued the father. "What am I doing, father?" said Antonia. I'm loving Don Guerin with all my heart. Leave this convent instantly, wretched girl, cried her father. I will go out only as a corpse, father, replied Antonia. Thereupon, despite her father's outcries, she darted into the chapel on the heels of the monks, and took her place in her accustomed stall. The prior stood as if turned to stone. The furious nobleman would have pursued his daughter, but Don Guerin begged him not to profane the holy place by such a scandalous scene, and to wait until the service was at an end. The father consented, and followed Don Guerin into the chapel. The anthem was about to be chanted, and the majestic prelude upon the organ was like the voice of God, a wonderfully beautiful strain, but instinct with bitter irony and awful debate, responded to the sublime tones of the instrument. It was Antonia's voice, and every listening heart shuddered. The organ took up the chant, calm, grave, impressive, and seemed as if it was seeking to drown with its divine magnificence the bitter strains which insulted it from the stalls. Again, as if in acceptance of the challenge, Antonia's voice arose more wildly despairing, more impious than before. Everybody awaited in speechless dismay the result of this awful dialogue, this alternation of blasphemy and prayer, this strange conflict between God and Satan, and it was amid the most intense and agonizing silence that the celestial music burst forth like a peal of thunder, when the blasphemous strain died away, and poured out upon the heads of the listeners, all bowed save one, the torrents of its wrath. It was something like the dread voice which the guilty will hear on the judgment day. Antonia tried to keep up the contest, but her song this time was nothing more than a shrill, heart-rending cry, like the laugh at the damned, and she fell pale and stiff upon the pavement of the chapel. When they raised her, she was dead. Jesus Maria, cried Dame Ruperta. Poor Antonia, said her man innocently. Little fool, muttered Jack Aubrey. The others kept silence. So great was the impression produced even upon the skeptics by Dame Perini's narrative, but Scotzone wiped away a tear, and Pagolo crossed himself. When the prior, resumed Dame Perini, saw the devil's messenger thus crushed by the wrath of God, he believed, poor dear man, that he was forever delivered from the snares of the tempter, but he reckoned without his host, a very appropriate expression, as he had been so imprudent as to extend his hospitality to one possessed of the devil. On the following night, just after he had dropped off to sleep, he was awakened by the clanking of chains. He opened his eyes, instinctively turned them toward the door, and saw that it swung open unaided, and at the same time a phantom clad in the white robe of a novice drew near the bed, took him by the arm, and cried, I'm Antonia. Antonia, who loves thee, and God has given me full power over thee because thou hast sinned, in thought if not in act. And every night at midnight the terrible apparition returned, implacably true to its word, until at last Don Guerin made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and died, by the special favor of God, just as he knelt before the Holy Sepulchre. But Antonia was not satisfied. She fell back upon all the monks in general, and, as there were very few who had not sinned as deeply as the poor prior, she visited them all one after another during the night, roughly awaking them, and crying in an awe-inspiring voice, I'm Antonia, who loves thee. Hence the name of the ghostly monk. When you are walking through the streets at night, and a figure with a gray or white hood dogs your steps, hasten home. It is the ghostly monk in quest of prey. When the convent was demolished to make room for the chateau, they hoped to be rid of the spectre, but it seems that he is fond of the spot. At various times he has reappeared, and now, God forgive us our sins. The unhappy wretch has appeared again. May God preserve us from his wicked designs. Amen, said Dame Ruperta, crossing herself. Amen, said her man, with a shudder. Amen, said Jack Aubrey, laughing. And each of the others repeated the word with an inflection corresponding to the impression produced upon him. Chapter 8. What one sees at night from the top of a poplar. On the following day, which was that on which the whole court was to return from Fontainebleau, it was Dame Ruperta's turn to announce to the same auditory that she had a momentous revelation to make. As may be imagined, after such an interesting announcement, the whole party assembled once more in the same spot at the same hour. They were entirely at their ease, because Benvenuto had written to Ascanio that he should stay behind for 2 or 3 days to prepare the hall where his Jupiter was to be displayed, which Jupiter was to be cast immediately upon his return. The provost had simply made his appearance at the Hotel de Nesle to ask if there was any news of Colombe, but upon being informed by Dame Perini that everything was in statu quo, he at once returned to the Châtelet. The occupants of the Grand and Petit Nesle enjoyed entire freedom of action, therefore, both masters being absent. In the ease of Jacques Aubry, although he was to have met Gervais that evening, curiosity carried the day over love, or rather he hoped that Dame Rupeda would be less diffused than Dame Perini, and that she would have finished so early that he might hear her story and still keep his appointment. This is what Rupeda had to tell. Dame Perini's narrative ran in her head all night long, and from the moment that she entered her bedroom she trembled in every limb lest Antonia's spirit should pay her a visit, notwithstanding the blessed relics which hung about her bed. She barricaded her door, but that was a very inadequate precaution. The old servant was too well versed in the ways of phantoms not to be aware that they know nothing of closed doors. Nevertheless, she would have liked also to barricade the window looking upon the garden of the Grand Nesle, but the original proprietor had neglected to provide the window with shutters, and the present proprietor deemed it useless to burden himself with that expense. Ordinarily there were curtains at the window, but this time, as luck would have it, they were at the laundry. The window offered no protection, therefore, save an unpretentious pane of glass, as transparent as the air that it excluded. On entering the room, Rupeda looked under the bed, felt in all the drawers and closets, and did not leave a single corner uninspected. She knew that the devil occupies but little space when he draws in his tail and claws and horns, and that Asmodeus was corked up in a bottle for nobody knows how many years. The room was entirely untenanted, and there was not the slightest trace of the ghostly monk. Rupeda went to bed therefore somewhat more at ease, but she left her lamp burning nonetheless. She was no sooner in bed than she looked toward the window, and saw outside the window a gigantic figure, whose outlines were just discernible in the darkness, and which intercepted the light of the stars. The moon was invisible as it was in its last quarter. Good Rupeda shivered with fear. She was on the point of crying out or knocking, when she remembered the colossal statue of Mars, which reared its head before her window. She immediately looked again in that direction, and recognized perfectly all the outlines of the god of war. This reassured Rupeda for the moment, and she determined positively to go to sleep. But sleep, the poor man's treasure so often coveted by the rich, is at no man's orders. At night God opens heaven's gates for him, and the capricious rascal visits whom he pleases, turning aside disdainfully from him who calls, and knocking at their doors who least expect him. Rupeda invoked him long before he paid heed to her. At last, toward midnight, fatigue won the day. Little by little, the good woman's faculties became confused. Her thoughts, which were in general but ill-connected, broke the imperceptible thread which held them, and scattered like the beads of a rosary. Her heart alone, distraught by fear, was still awake. At last the two fell fast asleep, and all was said. The lamp alone kept vigil. But, like all things of earth, the lamp found rest 2 hours after Rupeda had closed her eyes in the sleep of the just. Upon the pretext that it had no oil to burn, it began to grow dim, sputtered, blazed up for an instant, and then died. Just at that time Rupeda had a fearful dream. She dreamed that, as she was returning home from visiting Perini, the ghostly monk pursued her. But happily, against all precedents of those who dream, Rupeda to her joy found that she had the legs of 15 years, and fled so swiftly that the ghostly monk, although he seemed to glide and not to run over the ground, only arrived in time to have the door slammed in his face. Rupeda thought, still dreaming, that she heard him snarl and pound upon the door. But, as may be imagined, she was in no haste to let him in. She lit her lamp, ran up the stairs 4 at a time, jumped into bed, and put out the light. But, just as she put out the light, she saw the monk's head outside her window. He had crawled up the wall like a lizard, and was trying to come through the glass. In her dream, she heard the grinding of his nails against it. His sleep can be so sound as to hold out against a dream of that sort. Rupeda awoke with her hair standing on end and dripping with icy perspiration. Her eyes were open, staring wildly around, and in spite of her they sought the window. With it she uttered a fearful shriek, for this is what she saw. She saw the head of the colossal mass shooting forth flame from its eyes and nose and mouth and ears. She thought at first that she was still asleep, and that it was a continuation of her dream, but she pinched herself till the blood came to make sure that she was really awake, She crossed herself and repeated mentally 3 Peters and 2 Aves, and the extraordinary phenomena did not disappear. Ruperta summoned strength enough to put out her hand, seize a broom, and pound against the ceiling with the handle thereof. Her man slept in the room above hers, and she hoped that the sturdy Tudor would be aroused and hurry to her assistance. But in vain did Ruperta knock. Her man gave no sign of life. Thereupon she changed the direction of her blows, and, instead of knocking on the ceiling to arouse her man, began to knock on the floor to arouse Pagolo, who slept in the room below. But Pagolo was as deaf as her man, and Ruperta pounded to no purpose. She then abandoned the vertical for the horizontal line. Ascanio was her neighbor, and she knocked on the partition with a broom handle. But all was silence in Ascanio's quarters, as in those of Herman and Pagolo. It was evident that neither of the 3 was at home. In an instant it occurred to Ruperta that the monk had carried off all 3 of them. As there was little consolation in this idea, Ruperta's terror waxed greater and greater, and, as she was certain that no one would come to her assistance, she thrust her head beneath the bedclothes and waited. She waited an hour and a half, 2 hours perhaps, and as she heard no noise, she regained her courage in a measure, softly removed the sheet from her head, and ventured to look with one eye, then with both. The vision had disappeared. The head of Maz had gone out, and all was dark once more. Although the silence and darkness were calculated to set her mind at rest, it will readily be understood that Dame Ruperta and slumber were at odds for the balance of the night. The poor woman lay, with her ear on the alert and both eyes wide open, until the first rays of dawn reflected on a window announced that the time for ghosts to walk had passed. Now this is what Ruperta had to tell, and it must be said in her honor that her narrative produced an even deeper impression than that of the preceding night. Its effect upon Dame Perini and her man, Scotzone and Pagolo, was particularly noticeable. The 2 men essayed to make excuses for not hearing Ruperta, but their voices trembled so, and their embarrassment was so great, that Jacques Aubrey roared with laughter. Dame Perini and Scotzone, on the other hand, did not breathe a word. They turned red and pale by turns, so that, if it had been daylight and you could have followed upon their faces the reflection of what was taking place in their minds, you would have believed them at the point of death from apoplexy, and again from inanition, all within 10 seconds. And so, Dame Perrine, said Scotzone, who was the first to recover her self-possession, you claim to have seen the monk's ghost walking in the garden of the Grand Nestle. As plainly as I see you, my child, was Dame Perrine's reply. And you, Ruperta, saw the head of the Maz on fire. I can see it still. Look you, said Dame Perini, the accursed ghost must have chosen the head of the statue for his domicile, and as a ghost must of course take a little exercise now and then like a natural being. He comes down at certain hours, walks hither and thither, and when is tired goes back into the head. Idols and spirits, you see, understand one another, like thieves on market day. They live in hell together, and this horrible false god Maz naturally enough offers his hospitality to the infernal monk. Believe you so, Dame Perini? Queried the innocent German. I am sure of it, Monsieur Herman, sure of it. It makes my flesh to creep, on my word, muttered Herman with a shudder. So you believe in ghosts? Herman, asked Aubrey. J.A., I do believe in them. Jacques Aubrey shrugged his shoulders, but as he did so he determined to solve the mystery. It was the easiest thing in the world for one who, like himself, went in and out of the house as familiarly as if he were one of the family. He made up his mind, therefore, that he would go and see Gervais the next day, but that on this evening he would remain at the Grand Nestle until 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock he would say good night to everybody and pretend to go away, but that he would remain within the precincts, climb a poplar, and make the acquaintance of the phantom from a hiding place among the branches. Everything fell out as the student planned. He left the studio alone as usual, shut the door leading into the quay with a great noise to indicate that he had gone out, then ran rapidly to the foot of the poplar, seized the lowest branch, drew himself up to it by his wrists, and in an instant was at the top of the tree. There he was just on a level with the head of the statue, and overlooked both the Grand and Petit Nestle, so that nothing could take place in the courtyard or garden of either unseen by him. While Jacques Aubrey was taking up his position on his lofty perch, a grand soiree was in progress at the Louvre, and all the windows were ablaze with light. Charles V had finally decided to leave Fontainebleau and venture within the walls of the capital, and the two sovereigns had entered Paris that same evening. A gorgeous welcoming fete awaited the emperor there. There was a banquet, gaming, and a ball. Gondolas lighted by colored lanterns glided up and down the Seine, laden with musicians, and made melodious pauses in front of the famous balcony, from which, 30 years later, Charles IX was to fire upon his people, while boats gaily decked with flowers conveyed from one bank of the river to the other those guests who were on their way from the Faubourg Saint-Germain to the Louvre, or who were returning to the Faubourg Saint-Germain. Among the guests, the Vicomte de Marmain was naturally included. As we have said, the Vicomte de Marmain, a tall, pink-cheeked, insipid dandy, claimed to be a great destroyer of hearts. On this occasion, he thought that a certain pretty little countess, whose husband happened to be with the army in Savoy, cast meaning glances at him. Thereupon he danced with her, and fancied that her hand was not insensible to the pressure he ventured to bestow upon it. And so, when he saw the fair object of his thoughts leave the ballroom, he imagined, from the glance she gave him as she departed, that, like Galatea, she was flying toward the willows in the hope of being pursued. Marmain therefore set out in pursuit, and as she lived in the vicinity of Rue Hautefeuille, his course lay from the Louvre to the Tour de Nesle, and thence along the quay and through Rue des Grands Augustins to Rue Saint-Andre. He was walking along the quay when he heard steps behind him. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. The moon, as we have said, was entering her last quarter, so that the night was quite dark. Among the rare moral qualities with which nature had endowed Marmain, courage did not hold a prominent position. He began, therefore, after a while, to be somewhat disturbed by these footsteps, which seemed to be following his own, and quickened his gait, wrapping himself more closely than ever in his cloak, and instinctively grasping the hilt of his sword. But the acceleration of speed profited him not. The steps behind governed themselves by his, and even seemed to gain upon him, so that, just as he passed the doorway of the Church of the Augustins, he realized that he should very soon be overtaken by his fellow traveler unless he quickened his pace still more to a racing speed. He was just about to adopt that extreme course when the sound of a voice mingled with the sound of the footsteps. "Padieu, my fine sir, you do well to walk fast," said the voice, "for this isn't a very safe place, especially at this hour. Right here, you know of course, is where my worthy friend Benvenuto was attacked. Benvenuto, the sublime artist, who is at Fontainebleau at this moment, and has no suspicion of what is going on under his roof. But as we are going in the same direction apparently, we can walk along together, and if we meet any cutthroats, they will look twice before they attack us. I offer you therefore the safeguard of my companionship, if you will give me the honor of yours." At the first word our student uttered, Marmain knew that it was the voice of one who wished him no ill, and at the name of Benvenuto he remembered and recognized the garrulous law student, who had on a previous occasion given him so much useful information concerning the interior of the Grand Nesle. He at once halted, and waited for Master Jacques Aubry to come up, for his society would be of advantage to him in two ways. In the first place, he would serve as a sort of bodyguard, and might in the meanwhile give him some fresh information concerning his enemy, which his hatred would enable him to turn to advantage. He therefore welcomed the student with his most agreeable manner. "Good evening, my young friend," he said, in reply to the familiar harangue addressed to him by Jacques Aubry in the darkness. "What were you saying of our good Benvenuto, whom I hope to meet at the Louvre, but who has remained at Fontainebleau, like the fox that he is?" "Well, by my soul, his luck," cried Jacques Aubry. "What, is it you, my dear Vicomte? Though, you forgot to tell me your name, or I forgot to remember it. You come from the Louvre? Was it very lovely, very lively, with love-making galore? We are in good luck, my gentlemen, aren't we? Oh, you heartbreaker." "Faith," said Marmain with a simper, "you a sorcerer, my dear fellow. Yes, I come from the Louvre, where the king said some very gracious things to me, and where I should still hear if a certain fascinating little countess had not signified to me that she preferred a solitude ado to all that crush. But whence come you?" "Whence come I?" rejoined Aubry, with a hearty laugh. "Faith, you remind me. Poor Benvenuto. On my word, he doesn't deserve it. Pray, what has happened to our dear friend?" "In the first place, You must know that I come from the Grand Nestle, where I have passed 2 hours clinging to the branch of a tree like any parrot. The devil, that was no very comfortable position. Never mind, never mind. I don't regret the cramp I got there, for I saw things. My friend, I saw things. Why? Simply in thinking of them I suffocate with laughter. As he spoke, Jacques Aubrey did laugh, so joyously and frankly that, although my man had as yet no idea what he was laughing at, he could not forbear joining in the chorus. But his ignorance of the cause of the students' amusement naturally made him the first to cease. Now, my young friend, that I have been drawn on by your hilarity to laugh in confidence, said my main, may I not know what wonderful things they were to amuse you so? You know that I am one of Benvenuto's faithful friends, although I have never met you at his house, as my occupation leaves me very little time to devote to society, and that little I prefer to devote to my mistresses rather than my friends, I confess. But it is none the less true that whatever affects him affects me. Dear Benvenuto, tell me what is going on at the Grand Nestle in his absence? That interests me more than I can explain to you. What is going on? Said Aubrey. No, that's a secret. A secret to me, said my main. A secret to me, who love Benvenuto so dearly, and who this very evening outdid King Francois I in eulogizing him. Ah, that is too bad, added the Viscount, with an injured expression. If I were only sure that you would mention to nobody, my dear, what the devil is your name, my dear friend, I would tell you about it, for I confess that I am as anxious to tell my story as King Midas's reeds were to tell theirs. Tell it then, tell it, said my main. You won't repeat it to anybody. To nobody, I swear. On your word of honor. On the faith of a nobleman. Fancy then. But, in the first place, my dear friend, you know the story of the monk's ghost, don't you? Yes, I've heard of it. A phantom that is said to haunt the Grand Nestle. Just so. Well, if you know that, I can tell you the rest. Fancy that Dame Perini. Colombe's governess. Just so. Well, it's easy to see that you're a friend of the family. Fancy then that Dame Perini, in a nocturnal walk which she was taking for her health, thought that she saw the ghostly monk also taking a walk in the garden of the Grand Nestle, while at the same time Dame Rupeda, you know Dame Rupeda. Isn't she Cellini's old servant? Just so. While Dame Rupeda, during one of her fits of sleeplessness, saw flames darting from the eyes, nose, and mouth of the great statue of Mars, which you have seen in the gardens of the Grand Nestle. Yes, a veritable chef d'oeuvre, said my main. Chef d'oeuvre is the word. Cellini makes nothing else. Flo, these two respectable ladies, I speak of Dame Perini and Dame Rupeda, agreed between themselves that the two apparitions had the same cause, and that the demon, who stalked abroad at night in the guise of the ghostly monk, ascended at cockcrow into the head of the god Mars, a fitting retreat for a lost soul like him, and was consumed by such fierce flames that they came out through the statue's eyes, nose, and ears. What sort of a fairy tale is this, my dear man? Said my main, unable to tell whether the student was joking or talking seriously. The tale of a ghost, my friend, nothing more nor less. Can it be that an intelligent fellow like you believes in such stuff? Why, no, I don't believe in it, said Jacques Aubrey. That is just why I concluded to pass the night in a poplar tree to clear up the mystery, and find out who the demon really is who is upsetting the whole household. So I pretended to come out, but instead of closing the door of the Grand Nestle behind me, I closed it in front of me, glided back in the darkness without being seen, and got safely to the poplar upon which I had my eye. 5 minutes later, I was snugly ensconced among the branches on a level with Mars's head. Now guess what I saw. How can I guess, pray? To be sure, one must be a sorcerer to guess such things. In the first place, I saw the great door open, the door at the top of the steps. You know? Yes, I know it, said my main. I saw the door open, and a man put his nose out to see if there was anyone in the courtyard. It was her man, the fat German. Yes, her man, the fat German, echoed my main. When he was fully assured that the courtyard was deserted, having looked about everywhere, except in the tree, where, As you can imagine, he was very far from suspecting my presence. He came out, closed the door behind him, descended the 5 or 6 steps, and went straight to the door of the Pettinestle, where he knocked 3 times. At that signal, a woman came out of the Pettinestle and opened the door. This woman was our friend Dame Perini, who apparently has a weakness for walking about at night with our Goliath. No, really? Oh, the poor provost. Wait a moment. Wait, that's not all. I was looking after them as they went into the Pettinestle, when suddenly I heard the grating of a window sash at my left. I turned. The window opened and out came Pagolo, that brigand of Pagolo. Who would have believed it of him with all his protestations, and his paters and aves? Out came Pagolo, and, after looking about as cautiously as Herman, straddled the windowsill, slid down the gutter, and went from balcony to balcony until he reached the window. Guess of whose room? Viscount. How can I tell? Was it Dame Ruperta's? Oh no, Scott's, nothing less. Scott's own, Benvenuto's beloved model. A lovely brunette, my word for it. Can you believe it of the rascal Viscount? Indeed, it's most diverting, said my main. Is that all you saw? Wait a bit, my dear fellow. I have kept the best till the last, the best morsel for the born bouch. Wait a bit, we aren't there yet, but we soon shall be, never fear. I am listening, said my main. On my honor, my dear fellow, it couldn't be more diverting. Wait a bit, I say, wait a bit. I was watching my Pagolo running from balcony to balcony at the risk of breaking his neck, when I heard another noise, which came almost from the foot of the tree in which I was sitting. I looked down and saw Ascanio creeping stealthily along from the foundry. Ascanio, Benvenuto's beloved pupil. Himself, my friend, himself. A sort of choir boy, to whom one would give absolution without confession. Oh yes, that comes of trusting to appearances. Why had Ascanio come out? Ah, that's just it. Why had he? That's what I asked myself at first, but soon I had no occasion to ask it, for Ascanio, after having made sure, as Herman and Pagolo had done, that nobody could see him, took from a foundry a long ladder, which he rested against the shoulders of Mars, and up he climbed. As the ladder was on the opposite side from myself, I lost sight of him as he went up, and was just wondering what had become of him when I saw a light in the eyes of the statue. What's that you say? Cried my main. The exact truth, my friend, and I confess that if it had happened without any knowledge on my part of what had happened previously, I should not have been altogether at my ease. But I had seen Ascanio disappear, and I suspected that the light was caused by him. But what was Ascanio doing at that hour in the head of the god Mars? Ah, that is just a question I asked myself, and as there was no one to answer me, I determined to find out for myself. I gazed with all my eyes, and succeeded in discovering, through those of the statue, a ghost, I faith. Yes, dressed all in white, the ghost of a woman, at whose feet Ascanio was kneeling as respectfully as before Madonna. Unfortunately, the Madonna's back was turned to me, and I could not see her face, but I saw her neck. Oh, what lovely necks ghosts have, my dear Viscount. Imagine a perfect swan's neck, white as snow. And Ascanio was gazing at it, the impious varlet, with a degree of adoration which convinced me that the ghost was a woman. What do you say to that, my dear fellow? Gad, it's a neat trick, eh? To conceal one's mistress in the head of a statue. Yes, it's most ingenious, rejoined my main, laughing and reflecting at the same time. Very ingenious, in good sooth, and you have no suspicion who the woman can be. Upon my honor, I have no idea. And you? No more than you. What did you do, pray, when you saw all this? What did I do? I laughed so that I lost my balance, and if I hadn't caught on a branch, I should have broken my neck. As there was nothing more to see, and I had fallen halfway to the ground, I climbed down the rest of the way, crept to the door, and was on my way home, still laughing all by myself, when I met you, and you compelled me to tell you the story. Now, give me your advice, as you are Benvenuto's friends. What must I do about telling him? As for Dame Perini, that doesn't concern him. The dear woman is of age, and consequently mistress of her actions. But as the Scots own, and the Venus who lodges in the head of Mars, it's a different matter. And you want me to advise you as to what you ought to do? Yes, I do indeed. I am much perplexed. My dear, I always forget your name. My advice is to say nothing to him. So much the worse for those who are foolish enough to allow themselves to be deceived. I am obliged to you, Master Jack Aubrey, for your company and your agreeable conversation. But here we are at Rue Hautefeuille, and to return confidence for confidence, this is where my charmer dwells. Adieu, my dear, my excellent friend, said Jack Aubrey, pressing the Viscount's hand. Your advice is good, and I will follow it. Good luck, and may Cupid watch over you. Thereupon they parted, Marmain taking Rue Hautefeuille, and Jack Aubrey Rue Poupée, on his way to Rue de la Harpe, at the far end of which he had taken up his abode. The Viscount lied to the unlucky student when he declared that he had no suspicion as to the identity of the female demon whom Ascanio adored on his knees. His first thought was that the inhabitant of Mars was no other than Colombe, and the more he reflected upon it, the more firmly convinced he became. As we have said, Marmain was equally ill-disposed toward the Provost, D'Orbec, and Cellini, and he found himself in a very awkward position as regarded the gratification of his ill will, for he could not inflict suffering upon one without giving pleasure to the others. If he held his peace, D'Orbec and the Provost would remain in their present embarrassed plight, but Benvenuto would likewise continue in his present joyous frame of mind. If, on the other hand, he disclosed what he had learned, Benvenuto would be in despair, but the Provost would recover his child, D'Orbec his betrothed. He determined, therefore, to turn the thing over in his mind until it should be made clear to him what was the most advantageous course for him to follow. His indecision did not long endure. Without knowing the real motive for her interest, he was aware that Madame d'Etampes was deeply interested in the marriage of Comte d'Orbec with Colombe. He thought that, by revealing his secret to the Duchess, he might gain sufficient credit for perspicacity to make up for what he had lost in the matter of courage. He resolved, therefore, to appear at a morning reception on the following day and tell her everything. Having formed that resolution, he punctually put it in execution. By one of those fortunate chances which sometimes serve the purpose of evil deeds so well, all the courtiers were at the Louvre, paying court to Francois I and the Emperor, and there was nobody at Madame d'Etampes' reception save her two faithful servants, the Provost and Comte d'Orbec, when the Vicomte de Marmain was announced. The Viscount respectfully saluted the Duchess, who acknowledged his salutation with one of those smiles which belonged to her alone, and in which he could express pride, condescension, and disdain all at the same time. But Marmain did not worry about this smile, with which he was well acquainted from having seen it upon the Duchess's lips not only for his own benefit, but for the benefit of many another. He knew, moreover, that he possessed a certain means of transforming that smile of contempt into a smile of good will by a single word. "Aha, Messire d'Estourville," he said, turning to the Provost, "so the prodigal child has returned." "Still the same pleasantry, Viscount," cried Messire d'Estourville with a threatening gesture, and flushing with anger. "Oh, don't lose your temper, my good friend, don't lose your temper," returned Marmain. "I tell you this, because, if you haven't yet found your vanished dove, I know where she has built her nest." "You do?" cried the Duchess, in the most charmingly friendly way. "Where is it, pray? Tell me quickly, I beg, my dear Marmain." "In the head of the statue of Mars, which Benvenuto has modelled in the garden of the Grand Nestle." Chapter 9, Mars and Venus. The reader will doubtless have guessed the truth, no less accurately than Marmain, strange as it may have appeared at first glance. The head of the Colossus was Colombe's place of retreat. Mars furnished apartments for Venus, as Jack Aubrey said. For the second time Benvenuto gave his handiwork a part to play in his life, summoned the artist to the assistance of the man, and embodied his fate in his statues as well as his thought and his genius. He had on an earlier occasion concealed his means of escape in one of his figures. He was now concealing Colombe's freedom and Ascanio's happiness in another. But, having reached this point in our narrative, it becomes necessary for greater clearness to retrace our steps a moment. When Cellini finished the story of Stefana, there was a brief pause. Benvenuto saw, among the phantoms which stood out vividly in his painful, obtrusive memories of the past, the melancholy but serene features of Stefana, 20 years dead. Ascanio, with head bent forward, was trying to recall the pale face of the woman who had leaned over his cradle and often awoke him in his infancy, while the tears fell from her sad eyes upon his chubby cheeks. Colombe was gazing with deep emotion at Benvenuto, whom another woman, young and pure like herself, had loved so dearly. At that moment his voice seemed to her almost as soft as Ascanio's, and between the two, both of whom loved her devotedly, she felt instinctively that she was as safe as a child could be upon its mother's knee. Benvenuto was the first to break the silence. "Well," he said, "will Colombe trust herself to the man to whom Stefana entrusted Ascanio?" "You are my father, he my brother," replied Colombe, giving a hand to each of them with modest grace and dignity, "and I place myself blindly in your hands to keep me for my husband." "Thanks," said Ascanio, "thanks, my beloved, for your trust in him." "You promised to obey me in everything," Colombe, said Benvenuto. "In everything." "Then listen, my children. I have always been convinced that man could do what he would, but only with the assistance of God on high and time here below. To save you from Comte d'Olbeck and infamy, and to give you to my Ascanio, I must have time, Colombe, and in a very few days you are to be the Count's wife. First of all, then, the essential thing is to delay this unholy union. Is it not, Colombe, my sister, my child, my daughter? There are times in this sad life when it is necessary to do wrong in order to prevent a crime. Will you be courageous and resolute? Will your love, which is so pure and devoted, be brave and strong as well? Tell me." "Ascanio will answer for me," said Colombe, with a smile, turning to the youth. "It is his right to dispose of me." "Have no fear, master. Colombe will be brave," said Ascanio. "In that case, Colombe, will you, trusting in our loyalty and your own innocence, boldly leave this house and go with us?" Ascanio started in surprise. Colombe looked at them both for a moment without speaking, then rose to her feet and said simply, "Where am I to go?" "Oh, Colombe, Colombe," cried Benvenuto, deeply moved by such absolute trust. "You are a noble, saintly creature, and yet Stefana made me very exacting in my ideal. Everything depended upon your reply. We are saved now, but there isn't a moment to lose. This is a decisive hour. God places it at our disposal. Let us avail ourselves of it. Give me your hand, Colombe, and follow me." The maiden lowered her veil as if to hide her blush from itself, then followed the master and Ascanio. The door between the Grand and Pettinesel was locked, but the key was in the lock. Benvenuto opened it noiselessly. When they were passing through, Colombe stopped. "Wait a moment," she said in a voice trembling with emotion, and upon the threshold of the house which she was leaving because it had ceased to be a sanctuary for her, the child knelt and prayed. Her prayer remained a secret between God and herself, but doubtless she prayed that he would forgive her father for what she was driven to do. Then she rose, calm and strong, and went on under the guidance of Cellini. Ascanio with troubled heart followed them in silence, gazing fondly at the white dress which fled before him in the shadow. They walked in this way across the garden of the Grand Nestle, the songs and heedless, joyous laughter of the workmen at their supper, for it will be remembered that it was a holiday at the chateau, reached the ears of our friends, who were anxious and nervous as people ordinarily are at supreme moments. When they reached the foot of the statue, Benvenuto left Colombe a moment, went to the foundry, and reappeared, laden with a long ladder which he leaned against the colossus. The moon, the celestial watcher, eased a pale light upon the scene. Having made sure that the ladder was firmly fixed in its place, the master knelt upon one knee in front of Colombe. The most touching respect softened the sternness of his expression. "My child," said he, "put your arms around me and hold fast." Colombe obeyed without a word, and Benvenuto lifted her as if she had been a feather. "The brother," he said to Ascanio as he drew near, "must allow the father to carry his beloved daughter." The powerful goldsmith, laden with the most precious of all burdens, started up the ladder as lightly as if he were carrying nothing heavier than a bird. As her head lay upon the master's shoulder, Colombe could watch his manly, good-humored face, and felt a degree of filial trust in him which was unlike anything she had ever experienced. As to Cellini, so powerful was the will of this man of iron that he was able to hold her in his arms, for whom he would have given his life 2 hours earlier, with a hand that did not tremble, nor did his heart heat more rapidly, or a single one of his muscles of steel weaken for an instant. He had ordered his heart to be calm, and his heart had obeyed. When he reached the neck of the statue, he opened a small door, entered the head, and deposited Colombe therein. The interior of this colossal head of a statue nearly 60 feet high formed a small round room some 8 feet in diameter and 10 feet high. Air and light made their way in through the opening for the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. This miniature apartment Benvenuto made when he was working at the head. He used it as a receptacle for the tools he was using, so that he need not be at the trouble of taking them up and down 5 or 6 times a day. Often, too, he carried up his lunch with him and set it out upon a table which stood in the center of this unique dining room, so that he had not to leave his scaffolding to take his morning meal. This innovation, which was so convenient for him, made the place attractive to him. He followed up the table with a cot bed, and latterly he had formed the habit of taking his noonday siesta in the head of his Mars, as well as of breakfasting there. It was quite natural, therefore, that it should occur to him to ensconce Colombe in what was clearly the most secure hiding place of all he could offer her. "This is where you must remain, Colombe," said Benvenuto, "and you must make up your mind to go down only after dark. Await here in this retreat, under God's eye and our watchful care, the result of my efforts. Jupiter," he added with a smile, alluding to the king's promise, "will finish, I trust, what Mars has begun. You don't understand, but I know what I mean. We have Olympus on our side, and you have paradise. How can we not succeed? Come, smile a little, Colombe, for the future at least, if not for the present. I tell you in all seriousness that we have ground for hope. Hope, therefore, with confidence. In God, if not in me. I have been in a sterner prison than yours, believe me, and my hope made me indifferent to my captivity. From now until the day that success crowns my efforts, Colombe, you will see me no more. Your brother Ascanio, who is less suspected and less closely watched than I am, will come to see you, and will stand guard over you. I rely upon him to transform this workman's chamber into a nun's cell. Now that I am about to leave you, mark well and remember my words. You have done all that you had to do, trustful and courageous child. The rest concerns me. We have now only to allow Providence time to do its part. Colombe, now listen. Whatever happens, remember this. However desperate your situation may seem to be or may really be, even though you stand at the altar and have naught left to say but the terrible yes which would unite you forever to Comte d'Orbec, do not doubt your friend, Colombe. Do not doubt your father, my child. Rely upon God and upon us. I will arrive in time, I promise you. Will you have the requisite faith and resolution? Tell me." "Yes," said the girl confidently. "'Tis well," said Cellini. "Adieu. I leave you now in your solitude. When everybody is asleep, Ascanio will come and bring you what you need. Adieu, Colombe." He held out his hand, but Colombe gave him her forehead to kiss as she was accustomed to do with her father. Benvenuto started, but passing his hand over his eyes, he mastered the thoughts which came to his mind and the passions which raged in his heart, and deposited upon that spotless forehead the most paternal of kisses. "Adieu, dear child of Stefana," he whispered, and went quickly down the ladder to Ascanio, with whom he joined the workmen, who had finished eating, but were drinking still. A new life, a strange, dreamlike life, thereupon began for Colombe, and she accommodated herself to it as she would have done to the life of a queen. Let us see how the aerial chamber was furnished. It had already, as we know, a bed and a table. Ascanio added a low velvet chair, a Venetian mirror, a collection of religious books selected by Colombe herself, a crucifix, a marvelous piece of carving, and a silver vase also from a master's hand, which was filled every night with fresh flowers. There was room for nothing more in the white shell, which contained so much of innocence and charm. Colombe ordinarily slept during the day. Ascanio had advised that cause for fear that, if she were awake, she might thoughtlessly do something that would betray her presence. She awoke with the stars and the nightingale's song, knelt upon her bed, in front of her crucifix, and remained for some time absorbed in fervent prayer. Then she made her toilet, dressed her lovely, luxuriant hair, and sat and mused. Ere long a ladder would be placed against the statue, and Ascanio would knock at the little door. If Colombe's toilet were completed, she would admit him and he would remain with her until midnight. At midnight, if the weather was fine, she would go down into the garden, and Ascanio would return to the Grand Nestle for a few hours' sleep, while Colombe took a nightly walk, beginning once more the old dream she used to dream in her favorite path, and which seemed now more likely to be fulfilled. After about 2 hours, the white apparition would return to her snug retreat, where she would wait for daylight and her bedtime, inhaling the sweet odor of the flowers she had collected for her little nest, and listening to the singing of the nightingales in the petit nestle, and the crowing of the cocks in the pre-auxiliary clerks. Just before dawn, Ascanio would return to his beloved once more, bringing her daily supply of provisions, adroitly subtracted from Dame Rupeda's larder by virtue of Cellini's complicity. Then they would sit for a while, conversing as only lovers can converse, evoking memories of the past, and forming plans for the future when they should be man and wife. Sometimes Ascanio would sit silently contemplating Colombe, and Colombe would meet his earnest gaze with a sweet smile. Often when they parted, they had not exchanged a single word, but those were the occasions on which they said most. Had not each of them in his or her heart all that the other could have said, in addition to what the heart cannot say? But God reads? Grief and solitude have this advantage in youth, that, while they make the heart noble and greater, they preserve its freshness. Colombe, a proud, dignified maiden, was at the same time a light-hearted young madcap. So there were days when they laughed as well as days when they dreamed, days when they played together like children, and, most astonishing thing of all, those days, or nights, for, as we have seen, the young people had inverted the order of nature, were not the ones that passed most quickly. Love, like every other shining thing, needs a little darkness to make its light shine the brighter. Never did Ascanio utter a word that could alarm the timid, innocent child who called him brother. They were alone and they loved each other, but for the very reason that they were alone they were the more conscious of the presence of God, whose heaven they saw near at hand, and for the very reason that they loved each other, they respected their love as a divinity. As soon as the first rays of dawn began to cast a feeble light upon the roofs of the houses, Colombe regretfully sent her friend away, but called him back as many times as Juliet did Romeo. One or the other had always forgotten something of the greatest importance. However, they had to part at last, and Colombe, up to the moment, toward noon, when she committed her heart to God and slept the sleep of the angels, would sit alone and dream, listening to the voices whispering in her heart and to the little birds singing under the lindens in her old garden. It goes without saying that Ascanio always carried a ladder away with him. Every morning she strewed bread around the mouth of the statue for the little birds. The bold-faced little fellows would come and seize it, and fly quickly away again at first, but they gradually grew tame. Birds seem to understand the hearts of young girls, who are winged like themselves. They finally would remain for a long while, and would pay in song for the banquet with which Colombe regaled them. There was one audacious goldfinch who ventured within the room, and finally acquired a habit of eating from Colombe's hand at morning and evening. When the nights began to be a little cool, one night he allowed himself to be taken captive by the young prisoner, who put him in her bosom, and there he slept until morning, notwithstanding Ascanio's visit and Colombe's nightly promenade. After that the willing captive never failed to return at night. At daybreak he would begin to sing. Colombe would then hold him for Ascanio to kiss, and set him at liberty. Thus did Colombe's days glide by in the head of the statue. Only two things occurred to disturb the tranquility of her existence. Those two things were the provost's domiciliary visits. Once Colombe awoke with a start at the sound of her father's voice. It was no dream. He was down in the garden beneath her, and Benvenuto was saying to him, "You ask what this colossal figure is, Monsieur d'Estourville? It is the statue of Mars, which His Majesty condescended to order for Fontainebleau. A little bauble 60 feet high, as you see. It is of noble proportions and very beautiful," replied d'Estourville. "But let us go on. This is not what I am in search of." "No, it would be too easy to find." And they passed on. Colombe, kneeling with outstretched arms, felt an intense longing to cry out, "Father, Father!" I am here." The old man was seeking his child, weeping for her perhaps, but the thought of Comte d'Orbec, the hateful schemes of Madame d'Etampes, and the memory of the conversation Ascanio overheard, paralyzed her impulse. And on the second visit, the same impulse did not come to her when the voice of the odious count was mingled with the provost's. "There's a curious statue built just like a house," said Dorbeck, as he halted at the foot of the colossus. "If it stands through the winter, the swallows will build their nests in it in the spring." On the morning of the day when the mere voice of her fiancé so alarmed Colombe, Ascanio had brought her a letter from Cellini. "My child," so ran the letter, "I am obliged to go away, but have no fear. I leave everything prepared for your deliverance and your happiness. The king's word guarantees my success, and the king you know has never been false to his word. From today your father also will be absent. Do not despair. I have now had all the time that I needed. Therefore I say to you again, dear girl, though you should be at the church door, though you should be kneeling at the altar, and on the point of uttering the words which bind you for life, let things take their course. Providence will intervene in time, I swear to you. Adieu, your father, Benvenuto Cellini." This letter, which filled Colombe's heart with joy by reviving her hopes, had the unfortunate result of causing the poor children to feel a dangerous sense of security. Youth is incapable of moderate feelings. It leaps at one bound from despair to the fullest confidence. In its eyes the sky is always black with tempest or resplendently clear. Being rendered doubly confident by the provost's absence and Cellini's letter, they neglected their precautions and thought more their love and less of prudence. Colombe was not so guarded in her movements, and Dame Perini saw her, but luckily mistook her for the monk's ghost. Ascanio lighted the lamp without drawing the curtains, and the light was seen by Dame Rupeda. The tales of the two gossips taken in conjunction aroused the curiosity of Jacques Aubry, and the indiscreet student, like Horace in the École des Femmes, revealed everything to the very person to whom he should have revealed absolutely nothing. We know the result of his disclosures. Let us now return to the Hotel d'Etampes. When Marmain was asked how he had stumbled upon his valuable discovery, he assumed an air of mystery and refused to tell. The truth was too simple, and did not reflect sufficient credit upon his penetration. He preferred to let it be understood that he had arrived at the magnificent results which aroused their wonder by dint of strategy and perseverance. The Duchess was radiant. She went and came, and plied the Viscount with questions. So they had her at last, the little rebel who had terrified them all. Madame d'Etampes determined to go in person to the Hotel de Nesle to make sure of her friend's good fortune. Moreover, after what had happened after the flight, or rather the abduction, of Colombe, the girl must not be left at the Petit Nesle. The Duchess would take charge of her. She would take her to the Hotel d'Etampes, and would keep a closer watch upon her than Duenna and fiancé together had done. She would keep watch upon her as a rival, so that Colombe would surely be well guarded. The Duchess ordered her litter. "The affair has been kept very secret," said she to the provost. "You, Dorbeck, are not the man to worry about a childish escapade of this sort. I don't see, then, what is to prevent the marriage from taking place, and our plans from being carried out." "On the same conditions, of course, Duchess," said Dorbeck. "To be sure, on the same conditions, my dear Count. As to Benvenuto," continued the Duchess, "who is guilty, either as principal or accessory, of an infamous abduction, never fear, dear Viscount, we will avenge you while avenging ourselves." "But I understand, madam," rejoined Marmain, "that the king in his artistic enthusiasm had made him a solemn promise, in case the statue of his Jupiter should be cast successfully, so that he will simply have to breathe a wish to see his wish gratified." "Never fear, that's just where I will watch," rejoined the Duchess. "I will prepare a surprise for him on that day that will be a surprise indeed. So rely upon me, and let me manage everything." That was in truth the best thing they could do. Not for a long while had the Duchess seemed so eager, so animated, so charming. Her joy overflowed in spite of her. She sent the provost away in hot haste to summon his archers, and ere long that functionary, accompanied by Dorbeck and Marmain, and preceded by a number of subordinates, arrived at the door of the Hotel de Nesle, followed at a short distance by Madame d'Etampes, who waited upon the quay, trembling with impatience, and constantly thrusting her head out of the litter. It was the dinner hour of the workmen and Ascanio, Pagolo, Little Jahan, and the women were the only occupants of the Grand Nestle at the moment. Benvenuto was not expected until the evening of the following day, or the morning of the day following that. Ascanio, who received the visitors, supposed that it was a third domiciliary visit, and, as he had very positive orders from the master on that subject, he offered no resistance, but welcomed them, on the other hand, most courteously. The provost, his friends, and his retainers went straight to the foundry. "Open this door for us," said d'Estourville to Ascanio. The young man's heart was oppressed with a terrible presentiment. However, he might be mistaken, and as the least hesitation might awaken suspicion, he handed the provost the key without moving a muscle. "Take that long ladder," said the provost to his archers. They obeyed, and under Messiah de Seville's guidance marched straight to the statue. There the provost himself put the ladder in place, and prepared to ascend, but Ascanio, pale with terror and wrath, placed his foot on the first round. "What is your purpose, messrs?" he cried. "This statue is the master's masterpiece. It has been placed in my charge, and the first man who lays hand upon it for any purpose whatsoever is a dead man. I warn you." He drew from his belt a keen-edged, slender dagger of such marvelous temper that it would cut through a gold crown at a single blow. The provost gave a signal, and his archers advanced upon Ascanio, pike in hand. He made a desperate resistance and wounded 2 men, but he could do nothing alone against 8, leaving the provost, Marmain, and Dorbeck out of the reckoning. He was forced to yield to superior numbers. He was thrown down, bound and gagged, and the provost started up the ladder, followed by 2 sergeants for fear of a surprise. Colombe had heard and seen everything. Her father found her in a swoon, for when she saw Ascanio fall, she believed him to be dead. Aroused to anger rather than anxiety by this sight, the provost threw Colombe roughly over his broad shoulders and descended the ladder. The whole party then returned to the quay, the archers escorting Ascanio, at whom Dorbeck gazed most earnestly. Pagolo saw his comrade pass and did not stir. Little Jahan had disappeared. Scotzone alone, understanding nothing of what had taken place, tried to bar the door, crying, "What means this violence? Messrs, why are you taking Ascanio away? Who is this woman?" But at that moment the veil which covered Colombe's face fell off, and Scotzone recognized a model for the statue of Hebe. Thereupon she stood aside, pale with jealousy, and allowed the provost and his people, as well as their prisoners, to pass without another word. "What does this mean, and why have you abused this boy so?" demanded Madame d'Etampes, when she saw Ascanio bound, and pale and covered with blood. "Unbind him! Unbind him!" "Madam," said the provost, "this same boy resisted us desperately. He wounded 2 of my men. He is his master's accomplice without doubt, and it seems to me advisable to take him to some safe place." "And furthermore," said Dorbeck in an undertone to the Duchess, "he so strongly resembles the Italian page I saw at your reception, and who was present throughout our conversation, that, if he were not dressed differently, and if I had not heard him speak the language which you assured me the page could not understand, upon my honor, Madame la Duchesse, I would swear it was he." "You are right, Monsieur le Prévôt," said Madame d'Etampes hastily, thinking better of the order she had given to set Ascanio at liberty. "You are right. This young man may be dangerous. Make sure of his person." To the chattelet with the prisoner, said the provost. "And we," said the Duchess, at whose side Colombe, still unconscious, had been placed, "we, messrs, will return to the Hotel d'Etampes." A moment later the hoofbeats of a galloping horse rang out upon the pavement. It was Little Jahan, riding off at full speed to tell Cellini what had taken place at the Hotel de Nesle. Ascanio, meanwhile, was committed to the chattelet without having seen the Duchess, and in ignorance of the part played by her in the event which destroyed his hopes. Chapter 10. The Rivals. Madame d'Etampes, who had been so desirous to see Colombe at close quarters ever since she had first heard of her, had her heart's desire at last. The poor child lay there before her in a swoon. The jealous Duchess did not once cease to gaze at her throughout the whole journey to the Hotel d'Etampes. Her eyes, blazing with anger when she saw how beautiful she was, scrutinized each of her charms, analyzed each feature, and pass in review one after another all the elements which went to make up the perfect beauty of the pale-cheeked girl who was at last in her power and under her hand. The two women, who were inspired with the same passion and disputing possession of the same heart, were face to face at last. One all-powerful and malevolent, the other weak, but beloved, one with her splendor, the other with her youth, one with her passion, the other with her innocence. Separated by so many obstacles, they had finally come roughly in contact, and the Duchess's velvet robe brushed against Colombe's simple white gown. Though Colombe was in a swoon, and was not the least pale of the two, doubtless a mute contemplation of her companion's loveliness caused her pride to despair, and destroyed her hopes. For a while, in her own despite, she murmured, "They told me truly. She is lovely, very lovely." Her hand, which held Colombe's, pressed it so convulsively that the young girl was brought to her senses by the pain, and opened her great eyes, saying, "Oh, madam, you hurt me." As soon as the Duchess saw that Colombe's eyes were open, she let her hand fall. But the consciousness of pain preceded the return of the faculty of thought. For some seconds after she uttered the words, she continued to gaze wonderingly at the Duchess, as if she could not collect her thoughts. "Who are you, madam?" she said at last, "and whither are you taking me?" Then she suddenly drew away from her, crying, "Ah, you are the Duchesse d'Étampes. I remember. "Hush," returned and imperiously. "Hush. Soon we shall be alone, and you can wonder and cry out at your ease." These words were accompanied by a stern, haughty glance, but it was a sense of her own dignity, and not the glance which imposed silence upon Colombe. She said not another word until they reached the Hotel d'Étampes, where, at a sign from the Duchess, she followed her to her oratory. When the rivals were at last alone and face to face, they eyed each other for 1 or 2 minutes without speaking, but with very different expressions. Colombe was calm, for her trust in Providence, and in Benvenuto sustained her, and was furious at her calmness. But although her fury was clearly evidenced by the contortion of her features, she did not give expression to it, for she relied upon her imperious will, and her unbounded power to crush the feeble creature before her. She was the first to break the silence. "Well, my young friend," she said, in a tone which left no doubt as to the bitterness of the thought, although the words were soft, "you are restored to your father, at last. It is well. But allow me first of all to compliment you upon your courage. You are bold for your age, my child." "I have God on my side, madam," rejoined Colombe simply. "What God do you refer to, mademoiselle?" "Oh, the God Maz, of course," returned the Duchess with one of those impertinent winks which she so often had occasion to resort to at court. "I know but one God, madam, the eternal God, merciful and protecting, who teaches charity and prosperity, and humility and grandeur. Woe to them who know not the God of whom I speak, for there will come a day when he will not know them." "Very good, mademoiselle, very good," said the Duchess. "The situation is admirably adapted for a moral lecture, and I would congratulate you upon your happy choice of a subject if I did not prefer to think that you are trying to excuse your wantonness by impudence." "In truth, madam," replied Colombe, without bitterness, but with a slight shrug of the shoulders, "I do not seek to excuse myself to you, because I am as yet ignorant of any right on your part to accuse me. When my father chooses to question me, I shall reply with respect and sorrow. If he reproves me, I will try to justify myself. But until then, Madame la Duchesse, permit me to hold my peace. I understand that my voice annoys you, and you would prefer, would you not, to remain alone with your thoughts and think at leisure of the man you love? No noise, however annoying it may be, can prevent me from thinking of him, madam, especially when he is unhappy. You dare confess that you love him. That is the difference between us. Madam, you love him, and dare not confess it." "Impudent hussy," cried the Duchess. "Upon my word, I believe she defies me." "Alas, no," replied Colombe softly. "I do not defy you. I reply simply because you force me to reply. Leave me alone with my thoughts, and I will leave you alone with your schemes." "Very good. Since you drive me to it, Child, since you imagine that you are strong enough to contend with me, since you confess your love, I will confess mine, but at the same time I will confess my hatred. Yes, I love Ascanio, and I hate you. After all, why should I dissemble with you, the only person to whom I may say whatever I choose? For you are the only one who, whatever you say, will not be believed. Yes, I love Ascanio. In that case I pity you, madam, rejoined Colombe softly, for Ascanio loves me. Yes, it is true, Ascanio does love you, but by seduction if I can, by falsehood if I must, by a crime if it becomes necessary, I will steal his love away from you. Mark that. I am indeed highly, Duchesse d'Étampes. Ascanio, madam, will love the one who loves him best. In God's name hear her, cried the Duchess, exasperated by such sublime confidence. Would not one think that her love is unique, and that no other love can be compared to it? I do not say that, madam. For the reason that I love, I know that other hearts may love as I do, but I doubt if yours is one of them. What would you do for him? Come, let us see. You boast of this love of yours which mine can never equal. What have you sacrificed for him thus far? An obscure life and wearisome solitude. No, madam, but my peace of mind. You have given him preference over what? Comte d'Orbec's absurd love. No, madam, but my filial obedience. What have you to give him? Can you make him rich, powerful, feared? No, madam, but I hope to make him happy. Aye, exclaimed the Duchess, it's a very different matter with me, and I do much more for him. I sacrifice a king's affection. I lay wealth, titles, and honors at his feet. I bring him a kingdom to govern. Yes, said Colombe with a smile, it's true that your love gives him everything that is not love. Enough of this insulting comparison, cried the Duchess violently, feeling that she was losing ground step by step. Thereupon ensued a momentary pause, during which Colombe seemed to feel no embarrassment, while Madame d'Étampes succeeded in concealing hers only by revealing her anger. However, her features gradually relaxed, her fire assumed a milder expression, lightened by a gleam of real or feigned benevolence. She was the first to reopen the conflict, which she did not propose should end otherwise than in a triumph. Let us see, Colombe, said she in a tone that was almost affectionate. If someone should bid you sacrifice your life for him, what would you do? I would give it to him blissfully. And so would I, cried the Duchess with an accent which proved the violence of a passion, if not the sincerity of the sacrifice. But your honor, she continued, would you sacrifice that as well as your life? If by my honor you mean my reputation, yes. If by my honor you mean my virtue, no. What? You do not belong to him? Is he not your lover? He is my fiancé, madam, that is all. Oh, she doesn't love him, rejoined the Duchess. She doesn't love him. She prefers her honor, a mere empty word, to him. If someone were to say to you, madam, retorted Colombe, angered in spite of her sweet disposition, if someone were to say to you, renounce for his sake your titles and your grandeur, abandon the king for him, not in secret, that would be too easy, but publicly. If someone were to say to you, and D. highly, Duchesse d'Étampes, leave your palace, your luxurious surroundings, and your courtiers for his humble artist studio, I would refuse in his own interest, replied the Duchess, as if it were impossible to say what was false beneath the profound, penetrating gaze of her rival. You would refuse? Yes. She doesn't love him, cried Colombe. She prefers honors, mere chimeras, to him. But when I tell you that I wish to retain my position for his sake, returned the Duchess, exasperated anew by this fresh triumph of her rival, when I tell you that I wish to retain my honors so that he may share them, all men care for them sooner or later. Yes, replied Colombe, smiling, but Ascanio is not one of them. Hush, cried Anne, stamping her foot in passion. Thus had the cunning and powerful Duchess signally failed to gain the upper hand over Mirgol, whom she expected to intimidate simply by raising her voice. To her questions, angry or satirical, Colombe had made answer with a modest tranquility which disconcerted her. She realized that the blind impulsion of her hatred had led her astray, so she changed her tactics. To tell the truth, she had not reckoned upon the possession of so much beauty or so much wit by her rival, and, finding that she could not bend her, she determined to take her by surprise. Colombe, as we have seen, was not alarmed by the double explosion of Madame d'Etampes' wrath, but simply took refuge in cold and dignified silence. The Duchess, however, following out the new plan she had adopted, now approached her with a most fascinating smile and took her affectionately by the hand. "Forgive me, my child," she said, "but I fear I lost my temper. You must not bear me ill will for it. You have the advantage of me in so many ways, that it's natural that I should be jealous. Alas, you, no doubt, like everybody else, consider me a wicked woman. But, in truth, my destiny is at fault. Not I, forgive me, therefore, because we both happen to love Ascanio is no reason why we should hate each other. And then he loves you alone. So 'tis your duty to be indulgent. Let us be sisters. What say you? Let us talk frankly together, and I will try to efface from your mind the unfortunate impression which my foolish anger may have left there." "Madam," said Colombe, with reserve, and withdrawing her hand with an instinctive movement of repulsion, but she added at once, "Speak, I am listening." "Oh," said Madame d'Etampes playfully, and as if she understood perfectly her companion's reserve, "have no fear, little savage. I do not ask for your friendship without a guarantee. In order that you may know what manner of woman I am, that you may know me as I know myself, I propose to tell you in 2 words a story of my life. My heart has little to do with my story, and we poor women, who are called great ladies, are so often slandered. Ah, envy does very wrong to speak ill of us when we are fitter subjects for compassion. For instance, what is your judgment of me, my child? Be frank. You look upon me as a lost woman, do you not?" Colombe made a gesture indicative of the embarrassment she felt at the idea of replying to such a question. "But if I am a lost woman, is it my fault? You and your happiness, Colombe, must not be too hard upon those who have suffered. You have lived hitherto in innocent solitude, and do not know what it is to be reared upon ambitious dreams. For they who are destined to that torture, like victims decked out with flowers, see only the bright side of life. There is no question of love, simply of pleading. So it was that from my earliest youth my thoughts were all bent upon fascinating the king. The beauty which God gives to woman to be exchanged for true love, I was forced to exchange for a title. They made of my charms a snare. Tell me now, Colombe, what could be the fate of a poor child, taken in hand before she has learned to know the difference between good and evil, and who is told, 'The good is evil, the evil is good'? And so, you see, although others despair of me, I do not despair of myself. Perhaps God will forgive me, for no one stood beside me to tell me of him. What was there for me to do, alone as I was, and weak and defenseless? Craft and deceit have made up my whole life from that time on. And yet I was not made to play such a hideous role. The proof is that I love Ascanio, and that when I found that I loved him I was happy and ashamed at the same time. Now tell me, my pure, darling child, do you understand me?" "Yes," innocently replied Colombe, deceived by this false good faith, this lie masquerading in the guise of truth. "Then you will have pity on me," cried the Duchess. "You will let me love Ascanio from a distance, all by myself, hopelessly, and in that way I shall not be your rival, for he will not care for me. And, in return, I, who know the world and its snares, its pitfalls and deceit, will take the place of the mother you have lost. I will guide you, I will save you. Now you see that you can trust me, for you saved my life. A child in whose heart the passions of a woman were sown, that in brief is my past. My present you see for yourself. It is a shame of being the declared mistress of a king. My future is my love for Ascanio, not his for me, because, as you have said, and as I have very often told myself, Ascanio will never love me, but for the very reason that love will remain pure, it will purify me. Now it is your turn to speak, to open your heart, to tell me everything. Tell me your story, dear girl." "My story, madam, is very brief and very simple. said Colombe. "It may all be summed up in 3 loves. I have loved, I love, and I shall love God, my father, and Ascanio. But in the past my love for Ascanio, whom I had not then met, was a dream. At present it is a cause of suffering. In the future it is a hope." "Very good," said the Duchess, restraining her jealousy and forcing back her tears. "But do not half confide in me, Colombe. What do you mean to do now? How can you, poor child, contend with 2 such powerful wills as your father's and Comte d'Orbec's? To say nothing of the king's having seen you and fallen in love with you." "Oh, mon Dieu," murmured Colombe. "But as this passion on the king's part was the work of the Duchesse d'Etampes, your rival, your friend, and D'Harley will deliver you from it. So we won't disturb ourselves about the king, but your father and the count must be reckoned with. Their ambition is less easy to balk than the commonplace fancy of the king." "Oh, do not be half kind," cried Colombe. "Save me from the others as well as from the king." "I know but one way," said Madame d'Etampes, seeming to reflect. "What is that?" "You will take fright and refuse to adopt it." "Oh, if only courage is required, tell me what it is." "Come here and listen to me," said the Duchess, affectionately drawing Colombe to a seat upon a stool beside her armchair and passing her arm around her waist. "Don't be alarmed, I beg, at the first words I say. Is it very terrifying?" Colombe asked. "Your virtue is unbending and unspotted, my dear little one, but we live, alas, at a time and in a society where such fascinating innocence is but a danger to them all, for it places you, without means of defense, at the mercy of your enemies, whom you cannot fight with the weapons they use to attack you. So make an effort. Descend from the heights to which your dreams have transported you, to the lower level of reality. You said just now that you would sacrifice your reputation for Ascanio. I do not ask so much as that, but simply that you sacrifice the appearance of fidelity to him. It is pure madness for you, alone and helpless, to struggle against your destiny. For you, the daughter of a gentleman, to dream of marriage with a goldsmith's apprentice. Come, trust the advice of a sincere friend. Do not resist them, but let them have their way. Remain at heart the spotless fiancée, the wife of Ascanio, and give your hand to Comte d'Orbecque. His ambitious schemes require that you should bear his name. But once you are Comtesse d'Orbecque, you can easily overturn his detestable schemes, for you have only to raise your voice and complain. Whereas now, who would take your part in the contest? No one. Even I cannot assist you against the legitimate authority of a father, while, if it were a question of foiling your husband's combinations, you would soon see me at work. Reflect upon what I say. To remain your own mistress, obey. To become independent, pretend to abandon your liberty. Strong in the thought that Ascanio is your lawful husband, and that union with any other is mere sacrilege, you may do what your heart bids you, and your conscience will be at rest, while the world, in whose eyes appearances will be preserved, will take your part. "Madam, madam," murmured Colombe, rising and straightening herself against the Duchess's arm as she sought to detain her. "I am not sure that I understand you aright, but it seems to me that you are advising me to do an infamous thing." "What do you say?" cried the Duchess. "I say that virtue is not so subtle as all that, madam. I say that your sophistries make me blush for you. I say that beneath the cloak of friendship with which you conceal your hatred, I see the net you have spread for me. You wish to dishonor me in Ascanio's eyes, do you not? Because you know that Ascanio will never love or will cease to love the woman he despises." "Well, yes," said the Duchess, bursting forth at last. "I am weary of wearing a mask. Ah, you will not fall into the net I have spread, you say? Very good. Then you will fall into the abyss I will push you into. Hear this. Whether you will or no, you shall marry d'Orbecque. In that case, the force put upon me will be my excuse. And by yielding, if I do yield, I shall not have profaned my heart's religion. Pray, do you mean to resist?" "By every means in the power of a poor girl. I warn you that I will say no. To the end. You may put my hand in that man's. I will say no. You may drag me before the altar. I will say no. You may force me to kneel at the priest's feet, and to the priest's face I will say no. What matters it? Ascanio will believe that you have consented to the marriage that is forced upon you. For that reason I hope I may not have to submit to it. Madam, upon whom do you rely to come to your assistance? Upon God above, and upon a man on earth. But the man is a prisoner. The man is free, madam. Why? Who is the man? I pray to know. Benvenuto Cellini. The Duchess ground her teeth when she heard the name of the man she considered her deadliest foe. But as she was on the point of repeating the name, accompanied by some terrible imprecation, a page raised a portiere and announced the king. At that announcement she darted from the room to meet Francois with a smile upon her lips and led him to her own apartments, motioning to her people to keep watch upon Colombe. Chapter 11. Benvenuto at Bay. An hour after the imprisonment of Ascanio and the abduction of Colombe, Benvenuto Cellini rode along the Quai des Augustins at a foot pace. He had just parted from the king and the court, whom he had amused throughout the journey by innumerable tales, told as he only could tell them, mingled with anecdotes of his own adventures. But when he was once more alone, he became thoughtful and abstracted. The frivolous talker gave place to the profound dreamer. While his hand shook the rein, his brain was busily at work. He dreamed of the casting of his Jupiter, upon which depended his dear Ascanio's happiness as well as his artistic fame. The bronze was fermenting in his brain before being melted in the furnace. Outwardly he was calm. When he reached the door of the Hotel de Nestle, he stopped for a moment, amazed not to hear the sound of hammering. The blackened walls of the chateau were mute and gloomy, as if no living thing were within. Twice the master rapped without obtaining a reply. At the third summons, Scotsson opened the door. "Ow! There you are, master," she cried when she saw that it was Benvenuto. "Alas, why did you not return 2 hours earlier?" "What has happened, in God's name?" demanded Cellini. "The provost, Comte d'Orbec, and the Duchesse d'Etampes have been here." "Well, they made a search. And then they found Colombe in the head of the statue of Mars." "Impossible." "The Duchesse d'Etampes carried Colombe home with her, and the provost ordered Ascanio to be taken to the Châtelet." "Ah, we have been betrayed," cried Benvenuto, striking his hand against his forehead and stamping upon the ground. As his first thought on every occasion was of vengeance, he left his horse to find his own way to the stable and darted into the studio. "Come hither, all of you," he cried. "All." Thereupon each one had to undergo an examination in due form, but they were all equally ignorant, not only of Colombe's hiding place, but of the means by which her enemies had succeeded in discovering it. There was not a single one, including Pagolo, upon whom the master's suspicion fell first of all, who did not exculpate himself in a way that left no doubt in Benvenuto's mind. It is needless to say that he did not for an instant suspect Herman, and Simon Lagosha for no more than an instant. When he became convinced that he could learn nothing in that direction, Benvenuto, with the rapidity of decision which was usual with him, made up his mind what course to pursue, and having made sure that his sword was at his side, and that his dagger moved easily in its sheath, he ordered everybody to remain at home in order to be at hand in case of need. He then left the studio and hurried across the courtyard into the street. His features, his gait, and his every movement bore the stamp of intense excitement. 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 schemes, 1,000 painful reflections were jostling one another confusedly in his head. Ascanio failed him at the moment when his presence was most essential, for all his apprentices, with the most intelligent of them all at their head, were none too many for the casting of his Jupiter. Colombe was abducted, and Colombe in the midst of a foes might lose heart. The serene, sublime confidence which served the poor child as a bulwark against evil thoughts and perverse designs would perhaps grow weaker, or abandon her altogether, in such a maze of plots and threats. With all the rest, he remembered that one day he had spoken to Ascanio of the possibility of some cruel vengeance on the part of the Duchesse d'Etampes, whereupon Ascanio replied with a smile, "She will not dare to ruin me, for with a word I could ruin her." Benvenuto sought to learn the secret, but Ascanio would make no other reply to his questions than this: "Today it would be treachery, master. Wait until the day comes when it will be only a legitimate means of defense." Benvenuto understood the delicacy which closed his mouth and waited. How it was necessary that he should see Ascanio, and his first endeavors should be directed to that end. With Benvenuto, the wish led at once to the decision necessarily to gratify it. He had hardly said to himself that he must see Ascanio, before he was knocking at the door of the châtelet. The wicket opened, and one of the provost people asked Cellini who he was. Another man was standing behind him in the shadow. "My name is Benvenuto Cellini," replied the goldsmith. "What do you wish?" "To see a prisoner who is confined herein." "What is his name?" "Ascanio." "Ascanio is in secret and can see no one." "Why is he in secret?" "Because he is charged with a crime punishable with death." "An additional reason why I should see him," cried Benvenuto. "Your logic is most extraordinary, Signor Cellini," said the man who was standing in the background, in a jeering tone, "and doesn't pass current at the châtelet." "Who laughs when I proffer a request? Who jeers when I implore favor?" cried Benvenuto. "I," said the voice. "I, Robert de Seville, Provost of Paris." To each his tone, Signor Cellini. Every contest consists of a game and revenge. You won the first bout, and the second is mine. You illegally took my property. I legally take your apprentice. You refuse to return the one to me. So never fear, I will not return the other to you. You are gallant and enterprising. You have an army of devoted retainers. Come on, my storm of citadels. Come on, my scaler of walls. Come on, my burster in of doors. Come and take the châtelet. I am waiting for you. With that the wicket was closed. Benvenuto, with a roar, darted at the massive iron door, but could make no impression upon it with the united efforts of his feet and hands. "Come on, my friend, come on, strike, strike," cried the provost from the other side of the door. "You will only succeed in making a noise, and if you make too much, beware the watch, beware the archers." "Ah, the châtelet isn't like the Hotel de Nesle, you will find. It belongs to our lord the king, and we shall see if you are more powerful in France than the king." Benvenuto cast his eyes about and saw upon the quay an uprooted milestone which 2 ordinary men would have found difficulty in lifting. He walked to where it lay, picked it up, and put it on his shoulder as easily as a child could do the same with a pebble. He had taken but a step or two, however, when he reflected that, when the door was broken in, he should find the guard waiting for him, and the result would be that he should himself be imprisoned. Imprisoned when Ascanio's liberty was dependent upon his own. He therefore dropped the stone, which was driven some inches into the ground by its own weight. Doubtless the provost was watching him from some invisible loophole, for he heard a burst of laughter. Benvenuto hurried away at full speed, lest he should yield to the desire to dash his head against the accursed door. He went directly to the Hotel d'Étampes. All was not lost, if, failing to see Ascanio, he could see Colombe. Perhaps Ascanio, in the overflowing of his heart, had confided to his beloved the secret he had refused to confide to his master. All went well at first. The gateway of the mansion was open. He crossed the courtyard and entered the reception room, where stood a tall footman with lace on all the seams of his livery, a sort of colossus 4 feet wide and 6 high. "Who are you?" he demanded, eyeing the goldsmith from head to foot. At another time Benvenuto would have answered his insolent stay by one of his customary violent outbursts, but it was essential that he should see Colombe. Ascanio's welfare was at stake, so he restrained himself. "I am Benvenuto Cellini, the Florentine goldsmith," he replied. "What do you wish?" "To see Mademoiselle Colombe." "Mademoiselle Colombe is not visible." "Why is she not visible?" "Because her father, Messiah d'Esteville, Provost of Paris, gave her in charge to Madame d'Étampes, and requested her to keep an eye upon her." "But I am a friend." "An additional reason for suspecting you." "I tell you that I must see her," said Benvenuto, beginning to get warm. "And I tell you that you shall not see her," retorted the servant. "Is Madame d'Étampes visible?" "No more than Mademoiselle Colombe." "Not even to me, her jeweler?" "Less to you than to any other person." "Do you mean that orders have been given not to admit me?" "Just so," replied the servant. You have put your finger on the spot. Do you know that I am a strange man, my friend, said Benvenuto, with a terrible laugh which ordinarily preceded his outburst of wrath, and that the place I am forbidden to enter is a place I am accustomed to enter. How will you do it, eh? You amuse me. When there's a door and a blackguard like you in front of it, for instance. Well, said the valet. Well, retorted Benvenuto, shooting the action to the word, I overturn the blackguard and break in the door. And with a blow of his fist he laid the valet sprawling on the floor, and burst in the door with a blow of his foot. Help, cried the servant, help. But the poor devil's cry of distress was not needed. As Benvenuto passed into the reception room, he found himself confronted by 6 others, evidently stationed there to receive him. He at once divined that Madame d'Etampes had been informed of his return, and had taken measures accordingly. Under any other circumstances, armed as he was with dagger and sword, Benvenuto would have fallen upon them, and would probably have given a good account of himself, but such an act of violence in the abode of the king's mistress might have deplorable results. For the second time, contrary to his custom, common sense carried the day over wrath, and, being certain that he could at all events have audience of the king, to whose presence, as we know, he had the privilege of being admitted at any hour, he replaced his sword, already half drawn, in its scabbard, retraced his steps, pausing at every movement in his rear, like a lion in retreat, walked slowly across the courtyard, and bent his steps toward the Louvre. Benvenuto once more assumed a calm demeanor, and walked with measured step, but his tranquillity was only apparent. Great drops of perspiration were rolling down his cheeks, and his wrath was rising mountain high within his breast, his superhuman efforts to master it making him suffer the more. Indeed, nothing could be more utterly antipathetic to his impulsive nature than delay, than the wretched obstacle of a closed door, or the vulgar insolence of a lackey. Strong men who command their thoughts are never so near despair as when they come in collision with a material obstacle and struggle to no purpose to surmount it. Benvenuto would have given 10 years of his life to have some men jostle him, and as he walked along he raised his head from time to time and gazed threateningly at those who passed, as if he would say, "Isn't there some unfortunate wretch among you who is tired of life? If so, let him apply to me. I'm his man." A quarter of an hour later he reached the Louvre and went at once to the apartment set apart for the pages, requesting immediate speech of His Majesty. It was his purpose to tell Francois the whole story, and make an appeal to his loyalty, and, if he could not obtain Ascanio's release, to solicit permission to see him. As he came through the streets, he considered what language he would use to the king, and as he had some pretensions to eloquence, he was well content with the little speech he had prepared. The excitement, the terrible news he had learned so suddenly, the insults heaped upon him, the obstacles he could not overcome, all these had combined to set the blood on fire in the irascible artist's veins. His temples throbbed, his heart beat quickly, his hand shook. He did not himself know the extent of the feverish agitation which multiplied the energy of his body and his heart. A whole day is sometimes concentrated in 1 minute. In such a frame of mind was Benvenuto when he appealed to a page for admission to the king's apartments. "The king is not visible," was the young man's reply. "Do you not recognize me?" asked Benvenuto in surprise. "Perfectly. I am Benvenuto Cellini, and His Majesty is always visible to me." "It is precisely because you are Benvenuto Cellini," returned the page, "that you cannot enter." Benvenuto was thunderstruck. "Ah, is it you, M. de Termes?" continued the page, addressing a courtier who arrived just behind the goldsmith. "Pass in, Comte de la Paix, pass in, Marquis d'Esprez." "And what of me? What of me, pray?" cried Benvenuto, turning white with anger. "You?" The king, when he returned 10 minutes since, said, "If that insolent Florentine makes his appearance, let him know that I do not choose to receive him, and advise him to be submissive unless he desires to make comparison between the castle of St. Angelo and the Châtelet. Help me, patience." "Oh, help me," muttered Benvenuto in a hollow voice. "Vry Dieu, I am not accustomed to being made to wait by kings. The Vatican's no less a place than the Louvre, and Leo X is no less great a man than Francois I, and yet I was not kept waiting at the door of the Vatican. nor that of Leo X. But I understand. It's like this. The king was with Madame d'Etampes. Yes, the king has just come from his mistress and has been put on his guard by her against me. Yes, that's the way it is. Patience for Ascanio. Patience for Colombe. Notwithstanding his praiseworthy resolution to be patient, however, Benvenuto was obliged to lean against a pillar for support. His heart was swollen to bursting, and his legs trembled under him. This last insult not only wounded him in his pride, but in his friendship. His soul was filled with bitterness and despair, and his clenched hands, his frown, and his tightly closed lips bore witness to the violence of his suffering. However, in a moment or two he recovered himself, tossed back the hair which was falling over his brow, and left the palace with firm and resolute step. All who were present watched him with something very like respect as he walked away. Benvenuto's apparent tranquility was due to the marvelous power he possessed over himself, for he was in reality more confused and desperate than a stag at bay. He wandered through the streets for some time, heedless as to where he might be, hearing nothing but the buzzing of the blood in his ears, and vaguely wondering, as one does in intoxication, whether he was awake or asleep. It was the third time he had been shown the door within an hour. It was the third time that doors had been shut in his face. In his face, Benvenuto's, the favorite of princes, popes, and kings, before whom all doors were thrown open to their fullest extent when his footsteps were heard approaching. And yet, notwithstanding this threefold affront, he had not the right to give way to his anger. He must dissemble and hide his humiliation until he had rescued Colombe and Ascanio. The throng through which he passed, thoughtless or full of business, seemed to him to read upon his brow the story of the repeated insults he had undergone. It was perhaps the only moment in his whole life when his great heart lost faith in itself. But after 10 or 15 minutes of this aimless, blind wondering, his will reasserted itself, and he raised his head. His depression left him, and the fever returned. Go to, he cried aloud, to such a degree did his mind dominate his body. Go to. In vain do they crowd the man. They cannot throw down the artist. Come, sculptor, and make them repent of their base deeds when they admire thy handiwork. Come, Jupiter, and prove that thou art still, not the king of the gods alone, but the master of mankind. As he spoke, Benvenuto, acting upon an impulse stronger than himself, bent his step toward the Tonnelles, that former royal residence, where the old constable and de Montmorency still dwelt. The effervescent artist was required to await his turn for an hour before he was admitted to the presence of the warrior minister of Francois, who was besieged by a mob of courtiers and petitioners. At last he was introduced, and de Montmorency was a man of great height, little if any bent by age, cold, stiff, and spare, with a piercing glance and an abrupt manner of speaking. He was forever scolding, and no one ever saw him in good humor. He would have looked upon it as a humiliation to be surprised with a laugh upon his face. How had this morose old man succeeded in making himself agreeable to the amiable and gracious prince, who then governed France? It is something that can be explained in no other way than by the law of contrasts. Francois had a way of sending away satisfied those whose petitions he refused. The constable, on the other hand, arranged matters in such a way that those whom he gratified went away in a rage. He was only moderately endowed in the way of genius, but he won the king's confidence by his military inflexibility and his dictatorial gravity. When Benvenuto entered, Montmorency was, as usual, striding back and forth in his apartment. He nodded in response to the goldsmith's salutation, then paused in his walk and, fixing his piercing gaze upon him, inquired, "Who are you?" "Benvenuto Cellini." "Your profession?" "Goldsmith to the king," replied the artist, wondering to find that his first reply did not make the second question unnecessary. "Ah, yes, yes," growled the constable. "I recognize you. Well, what do you want? What have you to ask, my friend? That I give you an order? If you have counted on that, your time is thrown away. I give you warning. Upon my word, I have no patience with this mania for art which is raging so everywhere today. One would say it was an epidemic that has attacked every one except myself. No, sculpture doesn't interest me in the very least. Master Goldsmith, do you hear? So apply to others, and good night." Benvenuto made a gesture, but before he could speak, the constable continued. Mondayu, don't let that discourage you. You will find plenty of courtiers who like to ape the king, and noodles who pose as connoisseurs. As for me, Haki, I stick to my trade, which is to wage war, and I tell you frankly that I much prefer a good, healthy peasant woman, who gives me a child, that is to say, a soldier, every 10 months, than a wretched sculptor who wastes his time turning out a crowd of men of bronze who are good for nothing but to raise the price of cannon. Monseigneur, said Benvenuto, who had listened to this long heretical harangue with a degree of patience which amazed himself, I am not here to speak upon artistic subjects, but upon a matter of honor. Ah, that's a different matter. What do you desire of me? Tell me quickly. Do you remember, Monseigneur, that His Majesty once said to me in your presence that, on the day when I should bring him the statue of Jupiter cast in bronze, he would grant whatever favor I might ask, and that he bade you, Monseigneur, and Chancelier Pitt remind him of his promise in the event of forgetting it. I remember. What then? The moment is at hand, Monseigneur, when I shall implore you to provide a memory for the king. Will you do it? Is that what you come here to ask me, monsieur? Cried the constable. Have you intruded upon me to beg me to do something I am bound to do? Monseigneur, you're an impertinent fellow, Master Goldsmith. Understand that the Connétable and de Montmorency does not need to be reminded to be an honorable man. The king bade me remember for him, and that is a precaution he might well take more frequently, with all due respect. I shall do as he bade me, even though the reminder be annoying to him. Adieu, Master Cellini, and make room for others. With that the constable turned his back on Benvenuto, and gave the signal for another petitioner to be introduced. Benvenuto saluted the constable, whose somewhat brutal frankness was not displeasing to him, and took his leave, still agitated, and impelled by the same feverish excitement and the same burning thoughts. He betook himself to the abode of Chancelier Pitt, near Port Saint Antoine, only a short distance away. Chancelier Pitt formed a most striking and complete contrast, moral and physical, to de Montmorency, who was always crabbed and always encased in armor from head to foot. He was polished, shrewd, crafty, buried in his furs, lost, so to speak, in the ermine. Nor could be seen of him save a bald head surrounded by a grisly fringe of hair, intelligent, restless eyes, thin lips, and a white hand. He was quite as honest, perhaps, as the constable, but much less outspoken. There again Benvenuto was forced to wait for half an hour, but his friends would not have recognized him. He had accustomed himself to waiting. Monseigneur, he said, when he was at last ushered into the Chancellor's presence, I have come to remind you of a promise the king made me in your presence, and constituted you not only the witness thereof, but the guarantor. I know what you refer to, Messiah Benvenuto, said Pitt, and I am ready, if you wish, to bring His Majesty's promise to his mind, but it is my duty to inform you that, from a legal standpoint, you have no claim upon him, for an undertaking indefinite in form, and left to your discretion, cannot be enforced before the courts, and never forward a cause of action. Wherefore, if the king satisfies your demand, he will do so purely as a matter of generosity and good faith. That is as I understand it, Monseigneur, said Benvenuto, and I simply have to request you when the occasion arises to fulfill the duty His Majesty entrusted to you, leaving the rest to his goodwill. Very well, said Pitt, I am at your service, my dear monsieur, to that extent. Benvenuto thereupon took his leave of the Chancellor, with his mind more at ease, but his blood was still boiling, and his hands were trembling with fever. His thoughts, excited by the annoyance and irritation and insults to which he had been subjected, burst forth at last in full freedom, after their long restraint. Space and time no longer existed for the mind which they overflowed, and as Benvenuto strode along toward his home, he saw in a sort of luminous dream Del Moro's house, Stefana, the castle of St. Angelo, and Colombe's garden. At the same time, he felt that his strength became more than human, and he seemed to be living in another world. He was still laboring under this intense exaltation of feeling when he entered the Hotel de Nesle. All the apprentices were awaiting his return, in accordance with his commands. How for the casting of the Jupiter, my children, he cried from a doorway, and darted into the studio. Good morning, master, said Jack Aubrey, who had come in behind Cellini, singing joyously as his wont was. You neither saw nor heard me, did you? For 5 minutes I have been following you along the quay, calling you. You walk so fast that I am quite out of breath. In God's name, what's the matter with you all? You are as sober as judges. To the casting, continued Benvenuto, without answering Aubrey, although he had seen him out of the corner of his eye and listened to him with one ear. To the casting, everything depends upon that. Merciful God, shall we be successful? Ah, my friend, he continued, abruptly addressing Aubrey. Ah, my dear Jacques, what sad news awaited me on my return, and what a cruel advantage they took of my absence. What is the matter, master? Cried Aubrey, really disturbed by Cellini's excitement and the dejection of the apprentices. Above all things, boys, throw in plenty of dry spruce. You know that I have been laying in a stock of it for 6 months. The matter, my good Jack, is that Ascanio is under lock and key at the Châtelet, and that Colombe, the provost's daughter, that lovely girl whom Ascanio loves, as you know, is in the hands of the Duchesse d'Étampes, her enemy. They found her in the statue of Maz where I had hidden her. But we will rescue them. Well, where are you going, Herman? The woods and the yard, not in the cellar. Ascanio arrested, cried Aubrey. Colombe carried off. Yes. Some villainous spy must have watched them, poor children, and surprised a secret which I had kept even from you, dear Jacques. But if I discover the knave, to the casting, boys, to the casting, that isn't all. The king refuses to see me, whom he called his friend. So much for the friendship of men. To be sure, kings are not men, but kings. The result was that I went to the Louvre to no purpose. I could not get speech of him. Ah, but my statue shall speak for me. Prepare the mold, my friends, and let us not lose a moment. That woman insulting poor Colombe, that infamous provost jeering at me, that jailer torturing Ascanio. Oh, I have had some fearful visions today. Dear Jacques, I would give 10 years of my life to the man who could gain admission to the prisoner, speak to him, and learn the secret by means of which I may subdue the arrogant duchess. For Ascanio knows a secret which possesses that power, yet, and refused to divulge it to me, noble heart. But no matter. Have no fear for thy child, Stephana. I will defend him to my latest breath, and I will save him. Yes, I will save him. Ah, where is the vile traitor who betrayed us, that I may strangle him with my own hands? Let me live but 3 days, Stephana, for it seems to me that the fire which consumes me is burning my life away. Oh, if I should die before my Jupiter is finished. To the casting, children, to the casting. At Benvenuto's first words, Jack Aubrey became pale as death, for he suspected that he was the cause of it all. As the master proceeded, his suspicion was changed to certainty. Thereupon some plan doubtless suggested itself to him, for he stole silently away while Cellini hurried away to the foundry, followed by his workmen, and shouting like a madman. To the casting, children, to the casting. Chapter 12 after the difficulty which an honest man experiences in procuring his own committal to prison. Poor Jack Aubrey was in a frame of mind bordering on despair when he left the Grand Nestle. There could be no doubt that it was he who, involuntarily to be sure, had betrayed Ascanio's secret. But who was the man who had betrayed him? Surely not the gallant nobleman whose name he did not know. Ah, no, he was a gentleman. It must have been that knave of a hen riot, unless it was Robin, or Chariot, or Guillaume. To tell the truth, poor Aubrey rather lost himself in his conjectures, for the fact was that he had entrusted the secret to a dozen or more intimate friends, among whom it was no easy matter to find the culprit. But no matter. The first, the real traitor was himself, Jacques Aubrey. The infamous spy so roundly denounced by Benvenuto was himself. Instead of locking away in his heart his friend's secret which he had surprised, he had spread it broadcast in a score of places, and had brought disaster upon his brother Ascanio with his infernal tongue. Jacques tore his hair. Jacques beat himself with his fists. Jacques heaped mortal insults upon himself, and could find no invective sufficiently bitter to qualify his conduct as it deserved. His remorse became so keen, and threw him into such a state of exasperation with himself, that, for the first time in his life perhaps, Jack Aubrey indulged in reflection. After all, when his head should be bald, his chest black and blue, and his conscience torn to rags, Ascanio would be no nearer freedom. At any cost, he must repair the evil he had done, instead of wasting his time in despairing. Honest Jack had retained these words of Benvenuto. I would give 10 years of my life to the man who would gain admission to the prisoner, speak to him, and learn the secret by means of which I may subdue the arrogant Duchess. And, as we have said, he began to reflect. Contrary to his wont, the result of his reflections was that he must gain admission to the Châtelet. Once there, he would find a way to reach Ascanio. But Benvenuto had sought in vain to gain admission as a visitor, and surely Jack Aubrey could never be so audacious as to think of attempting a thing in which the master had failed. However, although it might be impossible to effect an entrance as a visitor, it certainly should be much easier, at least so the student thought, to be admitted as a prisoner. He determined, therefore, to enter the Châtelet in that character. Then, when he had seen Ascanio, and Ascanio had told him all, so that he had no further business at the Châtelet, he would take his leave, rich in the possession of the precious secret, and would go to Benvenuto, not to demand the 10 years of his life that he offered, but to confess his crime and implore forgiveness. Delighted with the fecundity of his imagination, and proud of his unexampled devotion, he bent his steps toward the Châtelet. Let us see, he ruminated, as he walked with deliberate step toward the prison where all his hopes were centered. Let us see, in order to avoid any more idiotic mistakes, how matters stand. No easy task, considering that the whole business seems to me as tangled as Gervais' skein when she gives it to me to hold, and I tried to kiss her. Let's begin at the beginning. Ascanio loved Colombe, the provost's daughter. So far, so good. As the provost proposed to marry her to Comte d'Ulbec, Ascanio carried her off. Very good. Not knowing what to do with the sweet child when he had abducted her, he hid her in the head of the statue of Mars. Best of all, faith, it was a wonderfully ingenious hiding place, and nothing less than a beast. But let us pass over that. I shall find myself again later. Thereupon it would seem that the provost, acting upon my information, got his daughter into his clutches once more, and imprisoned Ascanio. Triple brute that I am. But here's where the skein begins to be tangled. What interest has the Duchesse d'Étampes in all this? She detests Colombe, whom everybody else loves. Why? I know. I remember certain jocose remarks of the apprentices. Ascanio's embarrassment when the Duchess was mentioned. Madame d'Étampes has her eye on Ascanio, and naturally abominates her rival. Jacques, my friend, you are a miserable wretch, but you are a clever dog all the same. Ah, yes. But now how does it happen that Ascanio has in his hands the means of ruining the Duchess? Why does the king appear at intervals in the affair, with one Stephana? Why did Benvenuto constantly invoke Jupiter, rather a heathenish invocation for a Catholic? Deuce take me if I can see through all that. But it isn't absolutely necessary that I should understand. Light is to be found in Ascanio's cell. Therefore the most essential thing is to get myself cast into the cell with him. I will manage the rest afterward. As he thus communed with himself, he reached his destination and struck a violent blow upon the great door of the Châtelet. The wicket opened, and a harsh voice demanded to know his business. It was the jailer's. I wish for a cell in your prison, replied Aubrey in a hollow voice. A cell? Exclaimed the astonished jailer. Yes, a cell, the blackest and deepest, even that will be better than I deserve. Why so? Because I am a great criminal. What crime have you committed? Ah, indeed, what crime have I committed? Jack asked himself, for he had not thought of preparing a crime suited to the occasion. As a fertile, lively imagination was not his most prominent characteristic, notwithstanding the compliments he had addressed to himself just before, he repeated stupidly, What crime? Yes, what crime? Guess, said Jack. This fellow ought to know more about crimes than I do, he added to himself, so I will let him give me a list and then make my selection. Have you murdered anybody? asked the jailer. Great God, what do you take me for, my friend? Cried the student, whose conscience rose in revolt at the thought of being taken for a murderer. Have you stolen anything? Continued the jailer. Stolen? The idea. What in heaven's name have you done then? Cried the jailer testily. To give yourself up as a criminal isn't all that is necessary. You must say what crime you've committed. But I tell you that I'm a villain, a vile wretch, and that I deserve the wheel or the gallows. The crime? The crime? The jailer repeated. The crime? Well, I have betrayed my friend. That's no crime, said the jailer. Good night. And he closed the wicket. That's not a crime, you say? That's not a crime? What is it then, pray? And yet grasped the knuckle with both hands, and knocked with all his strength. What's the matter? What's the matter? Said a different voice from within the shadowlet. It's a madman who wants to be admitted into the prison, replied the jailer. It is a madman. His place is not at the Châtelet, but at the asylum. At the asylum, cried Aubrey, scampering away as fast as his legs would carry him. At the asylum. Pest! That's not what I want. I want to get into the Châtelet, not the asylum. Besides, paupers and beggars are sent to the asylum, and not people who have 20 paris sous in their pocket as I have. The asylum. Why, that wretched jailer claims that to betray one's friend is no crime. So it seems that in order to have the honor of being committed to prison, one must have murdered or stolen. But now I think of it, why might I not have led some young girl astray? There's nothing dishonorable about that. Very good. But what girl? Gervais? Despite his preoccupation, the student roared with laughter. But, after all, he said, though it isn't so, it might have been. Good, good. I have discovered my crime. I seduced Gervais. On the instant he set off for the young working girl's home, ran up the 60 stairs which led to her lodgings, and burst into the room where the lovely grisette in a coquettish negligee was ironing her linen. Ah! Exclaimed Gervais, with a fascinating little shriek. Ah, monsieur, you frightened me. Gervais, my dear Gervais, cried Aubrey, rushing toward her with open arms. You must save my life, my child. One moment, said Gervais, using the hot flat iron as a shield. What do you want, Master Gadabout? For 3 days I haven't seen you. I have done wrong. Gervais, I am an unfortunate wretch. But a sure proof that I love you is that I run to you in my distress. I repeat it, Gervais, you must save my life. Yes, I understand. You have been getting tipsy in some wine shop and have had a dispute with someone. The archers are after you to put you in prison, and you come to poor Gervais to give you shelter. Go to prison, monsieur, go to prison, and leave me in peace. That is just what I ask and all I ask, my little Gervais, to go to prison, but the villains refuse to commit me. Oh, mon Dieu, Jacques, said the young woman compassionately, have you gone mad? There you are. They say that I am mad and propose to send me to the asylum, while the Châtelet is where I want to go. You want to go to the Châtelet? What for, Aubrey? The Châtelet's a frightful prison. They say that when one gets in there, it's impossible to say when one will come out. I must get in there. However, I must, cried the student. There is no other way to save him. To save whom? Ascanio. Ascanio? What? That handsome young fellow, your Benvenuto's pupil. Himself? Gervais. He is in the Châtelet, and is there by my fault. Great God! So that I must join him there, said Jack, and save him. Why is he in the Châtelet? Because he loved the provost's daughter, and seduced her. Poor boy. Why? Do they imprison men for that? Yes, Gervais. How you see it was like this. He had her in hiding. I discovered the hiding place, and, like an idiot, like an infamous villain, I told the whole story to everybody. Except me, cried Gervais. That was just like you. Didn't I tell it to you, Gervais? You didn't mention it. You're a great babbler with others, but not with me. When you come here, it's to kiss me, to drink or to sleep, never to talk. Understand, monsieur, that a woman loves to talk. Well, what are we doing at this moment, my little Gervais? Said Jack. We are talking, I should say. Yes, because you need me. It is true that you could do me a great service. What is it? You could say that I seduced you. Why, of course you seduced me, you wretch. I, cried Jack in amazement. I seduced you, Gervais. Alas, yes, that is the word. Seduced, monsieur, shamelessly seduced by your fine words, by your false promises. By my fine words and false promises. Yes. Didn't you tell me I was the prettiest girl in the whole quarter of Saint-Germain-des-Prés? I tell you that now. Didn't you say that if I didn't love you, you should die of love? Do you think I said that? It's strange I don't remember it. While, on the contrary, if I did love you, you would marry me. Gervais, I didn't say that. Never. You did say it, monsieur. Never, 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 Gervais. My father made me take an oath like Hannibal's to Hamilcar. What was that? He made me swear to die a bachelor, like himself. Oh, cried Gervais, summoning tears to the assistance of her words with a woman's marvelous power of weeping to order. Oh, you're like all the rest. Promises cost nothing, and when the poor girl is seduced, they forget what they promised. I will take my turn at swearing now, and swear that I will never be caught again. And you will do well, Gervais, said the student. When one thinks, cried the grisette, that there are laws for robbers and cut purses, and none for the scoundrels who ruin poor girls. But there are, Gervais, there are. Why? Of course. Didn't I tell you that they sent poor Ascanio to the Châtelet for seducing Colombe? They did well, too, said Gervais, to whom the loss of her honor had never presented itself so forcibly until she was fully convinced that Jack Aubrey was determined not to give her his name by way of compensation. Yes, they did well, and I wish you were in the Châtelet with him. Mon Dieu, that's all I ask, cried the student. And as I told you, my little Gervais, I rely upon you to put me there. You rely upon me. Yes. Make sport of me, ingrate. I'm not making sport of you, Gervais. I say that if you had the courage. To do what? Accuse me before the judge. Of what? Of having seduced you, but you would never dare. What's that? I wouldn't dare, cried Gervais in an injured tone. I wouldn't dare to tell the truth. Consider that you would have to make oath to it, Gervais. I'll do it. You will make oath that I seduce you. Yes, yes, 100 times yes. Then all goes well, said the student joyfully. I confess I was afraid. An oath is a serious matter. I'll take my oath to it this instant, and send you to the Châtelet, monsieur. Good. And you will find your Ascanio there. Splendid. And you will have all the time you need to do penance together. It's all that I ask. Where is the lieutenant criminal? At the Palais de Justice. I will go there at once. Let us go together, Gervais. Yes, together. In that way the punishment will follow at once. Take my arm, Gervais. Come, monsieur. They set off toward the Palais de Justice at the same gate at which they were accustomed to repair on Sundays to the pre-auxiliary clerks or the Butte Montmartre. As they drew near the Temple of the Miss, as Jacques Aubrey poetically called the edifice in question, Gervais' pace slackened perceptibly. When they reached the foot of the staircase, she had some difficulty in ascending, and finally, at the door of the lieutenant criminal's sanctum, her legs failed her altogether, and the student felt her whole weight hanging upon his arm. Well, Gervais, said he, is your courage giving out? No, said Gervais, but a lieutenant criminal is an appalling creature. Pardieu, he's a man like other men. True, but one must tell him things. Very well, tell them. But I must swear. Then swear. Yak, said Gervase. Are you quite sure that you seduced me? Am I sure of it? Said Jack. Pardieu. Besides, didn't you just insist upon it yourself that I did? Yes, that is true. But, strangely enough, I don't seem to see things now in just the same light that I did a short time ago. Come, come, said Yek. You are weakening already. I knew you would. Yek, my dear, cried Gervase, take me back to the house. Gervase, Gervase, said the student, this isn't what you promised me. Jack, I will never reproach you again or say a word about it. I loved you because you took my fancy. That's all. Alas, said the student, this is what I feared, but it's too late. How too late? You came here to accuse me, and accuse me you must. Never, Jack, never. You didn't seduce me. Jack, I was a flirt. Nonsense, cried the student. Besides, added Gervase, lowering her eyes, one can be seduced but once. What do you mean? The first time one loves. Hitty-toity, and you made me believe that you had never loved. Jack, take me back to the house. Oh, indeed I won't, said Jack, exasperated by her refusal, and by the reason she gave for it. No, no, no. And he knocked at the magistrate's door. What are you doing? Cried Gervase. You see, I am knocking. Come in, cried a nasal voice. I will not go in, exclaimed Gervase, doing her utmost to release her arm from the student's. I will not go in. Come in, said the same voice a second time, a little more emphatically. That, I will shriek, I will call for help, said Gervase. Come in, I say, said the voice a third time, nearer at hand, and at the same moment the door opened. Well, what do you want? Said a tall, thin man dressed in black, the mere sight of whom made Gervase tremble from head to foot. Mademoiselle he, said Aubrey, has come to enter complaint against a knave who has seduced her. With that he pushed Gervase into the black, filthy closet, which served as an anteroom to the lieutenant criminal's office. The door closed behind her as if by a spring. Gervase gave a feeble shriek, half terror, half surprise, and sat down, or rather fell, upon a stool which stood against the wall. Jack Aubrey, meanwhile, lest she should call him back or run after him, hurried away through corridors known only to law students and advocates, until he reached the courtyard of St. Chapel. Thence he tranquilly pursued his way upon St. Michel, which it was absolutely certain that Gervase must cross. Half an hour later she appeared. Well, said he, running to meet her, what happened? Alas, said Gervase, you made me tell a monstrous lie, but I hope God will forgive me for it in view of my good intention. I'll take it upon myself, said Aubrey. Tell me what happened. Do you fancy that I know? Said Gervase. I was so ashamed that I hardly remember what it was all about. All I know is that the lieutenant criminal questioned me, and that I answered his questions sometimes yes, sometimes no, but I am not sure that I answered as I should. Wretched girl, cried Aubrey. I believe it will turn out that she accused herself of seducing me. Oh, no, I don't think I went as far as that. At least they have my address, haven't they, so that they can summon me? Yes, murmured Gervase, I gave it to them. It's all right then, said Aubrey, and now let us hope that God will do the rest. Having escorted Gervase to her abode and comforted her as best he could for the false testimony she had been compelled to give, Jack Aubrey returned home, overflowing with faith in Providence. In fact, whether Providence took a hand in it, or chance did it all, Jack Aubrey received the next morning a summons to appear before the lieutenant criminal that same day. This summons fulfilled Aubrey's dearest hopes, and yet a court of justice is so redoubtable a place that he felt a shiver run through his veins as he read it. But we hasten to say that the certainty of seeing Ascanio again, and the longing to save the friend upon whom he had brought disaster, soon put an end to this demonstration of weakness on our student's part. The summons fixed the hour of noon, and it was only 9 o'clock. So he called upon Gervase, whom he found no less agitated than on the previous day. Well, said she, inquiringly. Well, repeated Jack triumphantly, exhibiting the paper covered with hieroglyphics which he held in his hand. Here it is. For what hour? Noon. That's all I was able to read. Then you don't know what you're accused of. Why? Of seducing you, my little Gervais, I presume. You won't forget that you yourself insisted upon my doing it. Why, no. I am ready to give you a certificate that you utterly refused to do it. Then you bear me no ill will for obeying you. On the contrary, I couldn't be more grateful to you. Whatever happens, if I did say all that, it was because I was obliged to. Of course. And if, in my confusion, I said more than I meant to say, you will forgive me. Not only will I forgive you, my dear, my divine Gervais, but I do forgive you now in advance. Ah, said Gervais, with a sigh. Ah, bad boy, with such words as those you turn my head. From which it is easy to see that Gervais had really been seduced. At 12:15, Yak Aubrey remembered that his summons bade him appear at 12. He took leave of Gervais, and as he had a long distance to go, he ran all the way. 12 o'clock was striking as he knocked at the lieutenant criminal's door. Come in, cried the same nasal voice. He was not called upon to repeat the invitation, for Yak Aubrey, with a smile on his lips, his nose in the air, and his cap over his ear, at once stood in the tall black-coated man's presence. What is your name? Asked the tall man. Jack Aubrey, replied the student. What are you? Law student. What have you been doing? Seducing girls. Aha! You're the man against whom a complaint was lodged yesterday by Gervais Perret Popinot. Very good. Sit down yonder and await your turn. Yak sat down as the man in black bade him do, and waited. 5 or 6 persons of varying age, sex, and feature were waiting like himself, and as they had arrived before him, their turns naturally came before his. Some of them went out alone. They were the ones, doubtless, against whom no sufficient evidence was adduced, while others went out accompanied by an exempt or by 2 of the provost guards. Yak Aubrey envied the fortune of these latter, for they were being taken to the Châtelet, to which he was so anxious to be admitted. At last the name of Jacques Aubrey, student, was called. Yak Aubrey instantly rose and rushed into the magistrate's office as joyously as if he were on his way to the most agreeable of entertainments. There were 2 men in the lieutenant criminal's sanctum, one taller, thinner, and more forbidding than he in the antechamber, which Yak Aubrey would have deemed impossible 5 minutes earlier. This was the clerk. The other was short, fat, coarse, with a cheerful eye, a smiling mouth, and a jovial expression generally. This was the magistrate. Aubrey's smile and his met, and the student was quite ready to grasp his hand. So strongly conscious was he of the existence of a bond of sympathy between them. Ha! Ha! How? Laughed the lieutenant criminal as he caught the student's eye. Faith, that is true, Messiah, the student rejoined. You seem a jolly dog, said the magistrate. Come, master knave, take a chair and sit you down. Yak Aubrey took a chair, sat down, threw one leg over the other and swung it in high glee. Aye, exclaimed the lieutenant, rubbing his hands. Master clerk, let us look over the complainant's deposition. The clerk rose, and, by virtue of his great height, read it over to the other side of the table, and selected the documents concerning Yak Aubrey from a pile of papers. Here it is, he said. Who lodges a complaint? Inquired the magistrate. Gervais Perret Popinot, said the clerk. That's it, said the student, nodding his head violently. That's the one. A minor, said the clerk, 19 years of age. Aho, a minor, exclaimed Aubrey. So it appears from her declaration. Poor Gervais, muttered Aubrey. She was quite right when she said that she was so confused she didn't know what answer she made. She has confessed to 22. However, 19 it is. And so, said the lieutenant criminal, and so, my buck, you are charged with seducing a minor child. Ha! 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 echoed Aubrey, joining in the judge's hilarity. With aggravating circumstances, continued the clock, mingling his yelping tones with the jovial voices of the magistrate and the student. With aggravating circumstances, repeated the former. The devil, exclaimed Jack. I should like very much to know what they were. As the complainant remained deaf to all the entreaties and wiles of the accused for 6 months. For 6 months. Jack interposed. Pardon, monsieur, I think there's a mistake there. For 6 months, monsieur, so it is written, replied the man in black, in a tone which admitted no rejoinder. So be it. 6 months it is, said Jack, but in truth Gervase was quite right when she said. The said Jack Aubrey, angered by a coldness, threatened her. Oh, oh, exclaimed Jack. Oh, echoed the judge. But the clock read on. The said Gervase Perret Popinot held out so stubbornly and courageously that the insolent fellow begged her forgiveness in view of his sincere repentance. Ah, muttered Aubrey. Ah, exclaimed the magistrate. Poor Gervase. Aubrey continued, speaking to himself with a shrug. What was the matter with her head? But, continued the clerk, his repentance was only feigned. Unfortunately, the complainant, in her innocence and purity, allowed herself to be deceived by it, and one evening, when she was imprudent enough to accept refreshments of which the accused invited her to partake, the said Jack Aubrey mixed with her water. With her water? The student interrupted. The complainant declared that she never drinks wine, said the clerk. The said Jack Aubrey mixed an intoxicating decoction with her water. Look you, Master Clerk, cried Aubrey, what the deuce are you reading from? The complainant's deposition. Impossible. Is it so written? Inquired the magistrate. It is written. Go on. After all, said Aubrey aside, the more guilty I am, the surer I shall be of being sent to join Ascanio at the Châtelet. Intoxicating decoction it is. Go on, Master Clerk. You confess, do you? Queried the judge. I confess, said the student. Aye, Gello's bird, exclaimed the judge, roaring with laughter and rubbing his hands. So that, continued the clerk, poor Gervase, bereft of her reason, ended by confessing to the seducer that she loved him. Aha, said Jack. Lucky knave, murmured the lieutenant criminal, whose little eyes shone. Why, cried Aubrey. Why, there isn't a word of truth in the whole of it. You deny the charge? Absolutely. Right, said the magistrate, that the accused declares that he is not guilty of any of the charges brought against him. Wait a moment, cried the student, who reflected that if he denied his guilt, they would not send him to prison. So you don't deny it altogether? Queried the judge. I confess that there is some little truth, not in the form, but in the substance. Oh, as you have confessed to the decoction, said the judge, you may as well admit the results. True, said Jack. As I confess to the decoction, I admit the rest, Master Clerk. But, upon my word, he added in an undertone, Gervase was quite right in saying. But that's not all, the clerk interrupted him. What? That's not all. The crime of which the accused was guilty had terrible results. The unhappy Gervase discovered that she was about to become a mother. Ah, that is too much, cried Jack. Do you deny the paternity? Asked the judge. Not only do I deny the paternity, but I deny the condition. Right, said the judge, that the accused denies the paternity and also denies the condition. An inquiry will be ordered on that point. One moment, cried Aubrey, realizing that Gervase were convicted of falsehood on a single point. The whole structure would fall to the ground. Did Gervase really say what the clerk has read? She said it word for word, replied the clerk. Then if she said it, continued Aubrey, if she said it, why? Well, queried the lieutenant criminal. Why, it must be so. Right that the accused pleads guilty to all the charges. The clerk wrote as directed. Padieu, said the student to himself. If Ascanio deserves a week in the Châtelet for simply paying court to Colombe, I, who have deceived Gervase, drugged her, and seduced her, can count upon 3 months' incarceration at the very least. But, faith, I would like to be sure of my facts. However, I must congratulate Gervase. Pass. She kept to her word, and Jeanne d'Arc was nowhere beside her. So you confess to all the crimes you were accused of, said the judge. I do, Messiah, replied Jack unhesitatingly. I do, all of them and more too, if you choose. I am a great sinner, Monsieur le Lieutenant Criminal, don't spare me. Impudent varlet, muttered the magistrate, in the tone in which the uncle of comedy speaks to his nephew. Impudent varlet, out upon you. With that he let his great round head, with his bloated, purple face, full upon his breast, and reflected magisterially. Whereas, he began, after meditating a few moments, raising his head and lifting the index finger of his right hand. Right, Master Clerk. Whereas Jacques Aubry, clerk of the Basoche, has pleaded guilty to the charge of seducing one Gervase Perret Popinot by fine promises and simulated affection, we sentence said Jacques Aubry to pay a fine of 20 Paris sous, to support the child, if it is a boy, and to pay the costs. And the imprisonment, cried Aubry. Imprisonment? What do you mean? Asked the judge. Why, I mean the imprisonment. For heaven's sake, aren't you going to sentence me to prison? No, you're not going to order me committed to the Châtelet as Ascanio was. Who's Ascanio? Ascanio is a pupil of Master Benvenuto Cellini. What did he do? He seduced a maid. Who was she? Mademoiselle Colombe d'Esterville, daughter of the provost of Paris. What then? What then? Why, I say that it's unjust, when we both committed the same crime, to make a distinction in the punishment. What? You send him to prison and fine me 20 Paris sous. In God's name, is there no justice in this world? On the contrary, rejoined the magistrate, it is because there is justice in this world, and enlightened justice too, that this is as it is. How so? They are honors and honors, my young rascal. The honor of a noble maiden is valued at imprisonment. The honor of a grisette is worth 20 Paris sous. If you want to go to the Châtelet, you must try your arts on a duchess, and then the affair will take care of itself. But this is frightful, immoral, outrageous, cried the student. My dear friend, said the judge, pay your fine and begone. I won't pay my fine, and I won't go. Then I shall call a couple of archers and commit you to prison until you do pay it. That's all I ask. The judge summoned 2 guards. Take the scoundrel to the Grands Carmes. The Grands Carmes, cried Jack. Why not the Châtelet? Pray. Because the Châtelet is not a debtor's prison, my friend. Because the Châtelet is a royal fortress, and one must have committed some heinous crime to be sent there. The Châtelet? Ah, yes, my little fellow, you'll get to the Châtelet soon enough. Just wait. One moment, said Aubry, one moment. What is it? If I am not to be sent to the Châtelet, I will pay. Very well. If you pay, there's nothing more to be said. You may go, you fellows. The young man will pay. The archers went out, and Jacques Aubry took from his wallet 20 Paris sous, which he spread out in a line on the judge's desk. See if that is right, said the lieutenant criminal. The clerk rose, and to execute the order bent his back like a howl, embracing in the half-circle described by his body, which seemed to possess the power of lengthening itself out indefinitely, his table and the papers which lay upon it. As he stood with his feet on the floor and his hands on the judge's desk, he reminded one of a somber-hued rainbow. It is right, he said. Then off with you, my young rascal, said the magistrate, and give place to others. The court has no more time to waste on you. Go. Yak so that he had nothing to gain by remaining there, and withdrew in despair. Chapter 13I, in which Jacques Aubry rises to epic proportions. Well, upon my word, said the student to himself as he left the Palais de Justice and mechanically crossed the Pont Auxiliary Moulins, which brought him out almost opposite the Châtelet. Upon my word, I'm curious and know what Gervais will say when she learns that her honor is valued at 20 paris sous. She will say that I have been indiscreet and told things I shouldn't have told, and she'll tear my eyes out. But what do I see yonder? What the student saw was a page belonging to the amiable nobleman to whom he was accustomed to confide his secrets, and whom he looked upon as one of his dearest friends. The boy was leaning up against the parapet of the bridge, and amusing himself by performing sleight-of-hand tricks with pebbles. "Padieu," said the student, "this happens very fortunately. My friend, whose name I don't know, and who seems to stand extremely well at court, may have influence enough to have me committed to prison. Providence sends his page to me to tell me where I can find him, as I know neither his name nor his address." In order to avail himself of what he considered a direct interposition of Providence in his behalf, Jacques Aubry advanced toward the young page, who likewise recognized him, and, letting his 3 pebbles fall into the same hand, crossed his legs and awaited the student with that knowing look which is especially characteristic of the profession to which he had the honor to belong. "Bonjour, Monsieur le Page," cried Aubry from a most distant point at which he thought the boy could hear his voice. "Bonjour, Seigneur Student," was the reply. "What are you doing in this quarter?" "Faith, if I must tell you, I was looking for something which I think I have found. Now that I see you, I was seeking the address of my excellent friend, the Comte, the Baron, the Vicomte, your master's address." "Do you wish to see him?" asked the page. "Instantly, if possible." "In that case you will have your wish in a moment, for he is calling on the provost." "At the Châtelet?" "Yes, he will come out directly. He is very lucky to be admitted to the Châtelet when he wishes, but is my friend the Vicomte, the Comte, the Baron." "Vicomte? On intimate terms with Messire Robert d'Estourville?" "The Vicomte de... Tell me," continued Aubry, anxious to avail himself of the opportunity to learn his friend's name at last. "The Vicomte de... The Vicomte de Mar." "Ah!" cried the student, interrupting the page in the middle of the word, as he saw the man he sought appear at the door. "Ah, my dear Viscount, there you are. I was looking for you and waiting for you." "Bonjour," said Mermain, evidently but little pleased at the meeting. "Bonjour, my dear fellow. I would be glad to talk with you, but unfortunately I am very hurried. So adieu." One moment," cried Jack, clinging to his friend's arm. "Deuce take me, you won't leave me like this. In the first place, I have a very great favor to ask of you." "You?" "Yes, I, and God's law, you know, bids friends to succor one another." "Friends? To be sure. Aren't you my friend? What constitutes friendship?" "Confidence. Now I am full of confidence in you. I tell you all my own business, and other people's too. Have you ever had occasion to repent of your confidence?" "Never, so far as you are concerned at least, but it's not so with everybody. There is one man in Paris that I am looking for, and with God's help I shall meet him some day." "My dear fellow," interrupted Marmain, who had a shrewd suspicion who the man was, "I told you that I was much hurried. But wait a moment, pray, when I tell you that you can do me a great service." "Well, speak quickly. You stand well at court, do you not?" "My friends say so." "You have some influence then." "My enemies may discover it to their cost." "Very good. Now, my dear Comte, my dear Baron, my dear Vicomte, help me to get into the Châtelet." "In what capacity?" "As a prisoner." "As a prisoner? That's a singular ambition, on my word." "As you please, but it's my ambition." "For what purpose do you wish to be committed to the Châtelet?" queried Mermain, who suspected that this strange desire on the part of the student indicated some new secret, which it might be to his advantage to know. "To any other than you I wouldn't tell it, my good friend," replied Jack. "Or I have learned to my cost, or rather to poor Ascanio's, that I must learn to hold my tongue. But with you it's a different matter. You know that I have no secrets from you. In that case, tell me quickly. Will you have me committed to the Châtelet if I tell you?" "Instantly." "Well, My friend, imagine that I was idiot enough to confide to others and yourself the fact that I had seen a lovely girl in the head of the statue of Mars. What then? The crack-brained fools. Would you believe that they spread the story so that it came to the provost's ears? And as the provost had lost his daughter some days before, he suspected that it was you who had selected that hiding place. He notified Dorbeck and the Duchesse d'Étampes. They came to the Hotel de Nesle to make a domiciliary visit while Benvenuto Cellini was at Fontainebleau. They carried off Colombe and imprisoned Ascanio. Nonsense. It's as I tell you, my dear Viscount. And who managed it all? A certain Vicomte de Marmain. But, interposed the Viscount, not at all pleased to hear his name upon the student's lips, you don't tell me why you want to be committed to the Châtelet. You don't understand. No, they arrested Ascanio. Yes, and took him to the Châtelet. Very good. But what they don't know, and what nobody knows save the Duchesse d'Étampes, Benvenuto, and myself, is that Ascanio possesses a certain letter, a certain secret, which places the Duchess in his power. Now do you understand? Yes, I begin to see light. But do you help me, my dear friend? You see, Viscount, continued Aubrey, assuming a more and more aristocratic air, I want to be admitted to the Châtelet, get to Ascanio's cell, take the letter or learn the secret, leave the prison again, go to Benvenuto and arrange with him some method whereby Colombe's virtue and Ascanio's love may triumph, to the confusion of the Marmains and Dorbecks, the provost, the Duchesse d'Étampes, and the whole clique. That's a very ingenious plan, said Marmain. Thanks for your confidence, my dear student. You shall have no reason to regret it. Do you promise me your assistance? To what end? Why, to help me get committed to the Châtelet, as I asked you. Rely upon me. Immediately. Wait here for me. Where I am, in this same spot. And you? I am going to get the order for your arrest. My friend, my dear Baron, my dear Count, but you must tell me your name and address in case I may need you. Useless. I will return at once. Yes, return as soon as possible, and if you chance to meet that accursed Marmain on the road, tell him. What? Tell him that I have sworn an oath that he shall die by no hand but mine. Adieu, cried the Viscount. Adieu, and wait here for me. Au revoir, said Aubrey. I will expect you soon. You are a friend indeed, a man one can trust, and I would be glad to know. Adieu, Seigneur Student, said the page, who had stood aloof during this conversation, and was now about to follow his master. Adieu, my pretty page, said Aubrey, but before you leave me do me a favor. What is it? Who is this gallant nobleman to whom you have the honor to belong? He whom you've been talking with for the last 15 minutes. The same. And whom you call friend? Yes. You don't know his name? No. Why, he is a very well-known nobleman, is he not? To be sure. And influential. Next to the king and the Duchesse d'Étampes, he's a man. And his name, you say, is? He is a Vicomte, but he is turning back and calling me. Pardon? The Vicomte de Marmain. Marmain, cried Aubrey. Vicomte de Marmain. That young gentleman is the Vicomte de Marmain. Himself. Marmain, the friend of the provost and Dorbeck and Madame d'Étampes. In person. And the enemy of Benvenuto Cellini. Just so. Exclaimed Aubrey, to whom the whole past was revealed as by a flash of lightning. I understand now. Oh, Marmain. As the student was unarmed, with a movement as swift as thought, he seized the page's short sword by the hilt, drew it from its sheath, and darted in pursuit of Marmain, shouting, Halt! At his first shout, Marmain, decidedly ill at ease, looked around, and, seeing Aubrey rushing after him sword in hand, suspected that he was discovered. To stand his ground or fly was therefore the only alternative. Marmain was not quite courageous enough to stand his ground, nor was he quite enough of a coward to fly. He therefore adopted the intermediate course of darting into a house, the door of which stood open, hoping to close the door behind him. But unluckily for him, it was held fast to the wall by a chain which he could not detach, so that Aubrey, who was some little distance behind him, was in the little courtyard before he had time to reach the staircase. "Ah, Marmain, you damn Viscount, you infernal spy, you filcher of secrets. It's you, is it? At last I know you, and have my hand on you. En garde, villain. En garde." "Monsieur," replied Marmain, trying to assume a lordly bearing, "do you imagine that the Vicomte de Marmain will honor the student Yak Aubrey by crossing swords with him? If the Vicomte de Marmain will not honor Yak Aubrey by crossing sword with him, Yak Aubrey will have the honor of passing his sword through the Vicomte de Marmain's body." To leave no doubt in the mind of him to whom this threat was addressed, Yak Aubrey placed the point of his sword against the Viscount's breast, and let him feel the touch of the cold steel through his doublet. "Murder!" cried Marmain. "Help! Help!" "Oh, shout as much as you choose," retorted Jack. "You will have done shouting before anyone comes. And so the best thing you can do, Viscount, is to defend yourself. En garde, Viscount. En garde!" "If you will have it so," cried the Viscount, "wait a bit, and you will see." Marmain, as the reader will have discovered ere this, was not naturally brave, but like all noblemen of that chivalrous epoch he had received a military education. Furthermore, he was reputed to have some skill in fencing. It is true that this reputation was said to result rather in enabling him to avoid unpleasant encounters which he might have had, than in bringing to a fortunate conclusion those which he did have. It is none the less true that, being closely pressed by Yak, he drew his sword and stood on guard in the most approved style of the art. But if Marmain's skill was recognized among the noblemen at court, Yak Aubrey's address was accepted as an incontestable fact among the students at the university and the clerks of the Basoche. The result was that the moment their swords crossed, each of the combatants saw that he had to do with no despicable opponent. But Marmain had one great advantage. The page's sword, which Aubrey had taken, was 6 inches shorter than the Viscount's. This was no great disadvantage in defensive work, but became a serious matter when he wished to assume the offensive. Furthermore, Marmain was 6 inches taller than the student, and being armed with a sword as much longer, he had simply to present the point at his face to keep him at a distance, while Yak cut and thrust and feinted to no purpose. Marmain, without retreating a step, got out of reach simply by drawing his right leg back beside the left. The consequence was that, despite Aubrey's agility, the Viscount's long sword grazed his chest several times, while he could succeed in cutting nothing more substantial in the air, try as hard as he would. Aubrey realized that he was lost if he continued to play the same game, but in order to give his opponent no idea of the plan he proposed to adopt, he continued to thrust and parry in the ordinary way, gaining ground imperceptibly inch by inch. When he thought he was sufficiently near, he allowed himself to be caught off guard as if through awkwardness. Marmain, seeing an opening, made a lunge, but Aubrey was ready for him. He parried the blow, and, taking advantage of the position of his opponent's sword, 2 inches above his head, darted under it, leaped upon him, and thrust as he leaped, so cleverly and so vigorously that the page's short sword disappeared up to the hilt in the Viscount's breast. Marmain uttered one of those shrill cries, which indicate a severe wound. His hand fell to his side, the blood left his cheeks, and he fell headlong to the ground. At that moment the patrol came running up, attracted by Marmain's shrieks, the gestures of the page, and the sight of the crowd in front of the door. As Aubrey still held his bloody sword in his hand, they arrested him. Aubrey undertook at first to make some resistance, but as the leader of the patrol shouted, "Disarm the villain and take him to the Châtelet," he gave up his sword and followed the guards to the prison to which he was so anxious to gain admission, marveling at the merciful decrees of Providence, which accorded him at the same time the 2 things he most desired, vengeance upon Marmain and access to Ascanio. This time no objection was made to his reception within the walls of the royal fortress, but as it seemed that it was at the moment somewhat overburdened with guests, there was a long discussion between the jailer and the warden of the prison as to where the newcomer should be lodged. At last the 2 worthies seemed to agree upon the point. The jailer motioned to Aubrey to follow him, led him down 32 steps, opened the door, pushed him into a very dark dungeon, and closed the door behind him. Chapter 14 OF the difficulty which an honest man experiences in securing his release from prison. The student stood for an instant blinded by the abrupt transition from light to darkness. Where was he? He had no idea. Was he near Ascanio or far from him? He knew not. In the corridor through which he had passed, he had noticed but two other doors beside the one which was open for him. But his primary object was gained. He was under the same roof as his friend. Meanwhile, as he could not spend the rest of his life in that one spot, and as he could see at the other end of the dungeon, about 15 feet away, a faint ray of light struggling in through an a-hole, he cautiously put forth his leg, with the instinctive purpose of walking to that spot. But at the second step that he took, the floor seemed suddenly to give way under his feet. He plunged down 3 or 4 stays, and would doubtless have gone head foremost against the wall had not his feet come in contact with some object which tripped him up. The result was that he escaped with nothing worse than a few bruises. The object which had unwittingly rendered him so important a service uttered a hollow groan. "I beg your pardon," said Jack, rising and politely removing his cap. "It seems that I step upon some person or some thing, a rudeness of which I should never have been guilty, if I had been able to see clearly.